none to the Thursday, March 21st, 2019 meeting of the Wichita-Sedgwick County Metropolitan Area Planning Commission. And with that, we'd like to have public announcements.
Before we begin the agenda, the Wichita-Sedgwick County Metropolitan Area Planning Commission and the Wichita-Sedgwick County Board of Zoning Appeals would like to take this opportunity to welcome everyone to this public hearing. Copies of the agenda for today's meeting, the public hearing procedure, and Planning Department staff reports on all agenda items are available in the lobby of this conference room. The Planning Commission's and the BZA's bylaws limit the applicant on a zoning, subdivision, or variance application and his or her representative to a total of 10 minutes of speaking time at the start of the hearing on that item, plus up to 2 minutes at the conclusion of that hearing. All other persons wishing to speak on agenda items are limited to 3 minutes per person. However, if they feel that it is needed and justified, the chairman may extend these times by up to 2 minutes. All speakers are requested to state his or her name and address for the record when beginning to speak. When you are finished speaking, please write your name, address, and the case number on the sheet provided in the lobby. This will enable staff to notify you if there are any additional proceedings concerning that item. Please note that all written and visual materials you present to the Commission and the Board will be retained by the Secretary as part of the official record. If you are not speaking but you wish to be notified about future proceedings on a particular case, please sign in on that same sheet. The Planning Commission and the Board are interested in hearing the views of all persons who wish to express themselves on the agenda items. However, we ask that all speakers please be as concise as possible and avoid long repetitions of facts or opinions which have already been stated. For your information, the Wichita City Council has adopted a policy for all city zoning items. A copy of this policy is available in the lobby. The City Council relies on a written record of the Planning Commission hearings and does not conduct its own additional public hearings on these items. The decision of the BZA is final. Any appeal of a decision of the BZA is to district court.
Okay, and I want to recognize Betsy Pagan today. She's new. She took Anna's place, although I do see that we have Anna down there as well. But welcome. With that, we'll move forward to agenda item number 1, approval of the MAPC meeting minutes from March 7th.
Move to approve.
Second.
Made that motion. Mr. Klossmeyer, and a second by Mr. Green to approve the minutes.
Okay, I have to abstain. I
Right.
wasn't here.
I have
2 others are not here now
Right.
anyway.
Joe Johnson, John
Yeah.
Daly, and John McKay would have to abstain. Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. So we have 9 with 1 abstention. 8.
It was 1 abstention.
All right, moving on to agenda item number 2, consideration of subdivision committee recommendations. 2-1, sub 2018-00044, final plat Schulte Johnson addition. Is there anybody on the commission that would like to hear this case? Seeing none, is there anybody from the audience that would like to hear this case? Okay, we will take that item on consent. Item number 2-2, sub 2019-00005, final plat for Emerald Bay Estates 5th edition. Is there anybody on the commission that would like to hear this case? Seeing none, is there anybody from the audience that would like to hear this case? Seeing none, we will take this item on consent. Item number 2-3, sub 2019-00007, one-step final plat, the SG edition. Is there anybody on the commission that would like to hear this case? Seeing none, is there anybody from the audience that would like to hear this case? We'll take this item on consent. Item number 24, sub 2019-00008, one-step final plat, Hanging Rock Ranch Edition. Is there anybody on the commission that would like to hear this case? Seeing none, is there anybody in the audience that would like to hear this case? We will take that item on consent. Item number 25, the City of Wichita backyard drainage policy will be pulled for discussion.
Move for approval on items 2-1 through 2-4.
Second.
Okay, I have a,
Motion to approve.
yeah, I have a motion to approve by Mr. Hartman. Mr. Hartman, I apologize because your name just slipped my mind. And a second by Mr. Florence. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. All right, moving on to item number 3, vacation items. We have 3-1 VAC 2018-00037, city vacation of platted reserves, alleys, a 20-foot utility easement, partial complete access control along Ida, Orm Street right-of-way, and portion of Ida Street right-of-way on property zone GC and B. Is there anybody from the audience that would like to hear this case? Is there anybody in the audience that would like to hear this case? We'll take that item on consent.
Move to approve 3-1.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion by Mr. Johnson, a second by Mr. Green. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. We keep changing numbers. 11-0. Okay, moving on to public hearings. Item number 4, case number CON 2019-00004, city conditional use to allow correctional placement residents. Is there anybody on the commission that would like to hear this case? Seeing none, is there anybody in the audience that would like to hear this case? Okay, we will hear this case. Item number 5, case number PUD 2019-00003, city planned unit development to allow event center with gravel parking lot on property currently zoned LC. Is there anybody on the commission that would like to hear this case? Seeing none, is there anybody in the audience that would like to hear this case? Seeing none, we will take this item on consent. Case number ZON 2018-00053, city zone change associated with VAC 2018-00037 from B multifamily residential to GC for expansion of existing business. Is there anybody on the commission that would like to hear this case? Seeing none, is there anybody from the audience that would like to hear this case? Seeing none, we will take this item on consent. Item number 7, case number ZON 2019-00006, city zone change to amend PO number 300 to allow for limited restaurant uses on a property zone NR. Is there anybody on the commission that would like to hear this case? You all are easy today. Oh, yes. Oh, I spoke too soon. We will hear this case.
Cindy, I have a question. 0004, I don't know if that's the applicant that's over there that wanted to see it from the audience or not, to hear about it.
Sir, on the case that you wanted to hear, are you the applicant? No.
Okay, sorry.
Okay, then I would entertain a motion to take these item number 5 and 6 on
Move to
consent.
approve 5, 6.
Second.
I have a motion by Mr. Bill Johnson, a second by Mr. Jewell. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. We will be hearing agenda item number 8 and 9. So let's go back to agenda item number 2.5, City of Wichita backyard drainage policy. And we have Joe? Do we have Joe? There's Joe.
Good afternoon. I'm Joe Hickle, City Stormwater Engineer. You have before you a revision to the backyard drainage policy. This started in April of last year, where the Subdivision and Utility Advisory Committee asked city staff to take a look at the current document at the time. The title of the document does say version 12. We've been through several iterations of this document. I don't want to read the whole thing. Most of you have seen it. We've wordsmithed it together. It's been through several committee meetings of staff improving the document, 2 meetings of the subdivision committee. It provides definitions of requirements. It provides definitions of documents that are referred to in the document, and it has requirements of developers, builders, and homeowners to have good positive drainage in subdivisions. With that, page 2, item H, 3H, is our focus this afternoon. And it reads, flow line elevations of all open ditches or swales located within drainage easements at all lot corners and at 50 feet maximum intervals in between. That's not in dispute. That's just direction of how to draw the grading plan. What may be in dispute and we'll have discussion on is minimum slope for grass ditches or swales shall be 1.50%. The previous document did say 1.0%, and the Subdivision and Utility Advisory Committee recommended that the final document read 1.50%. With that, I know there's a lot of people here who want to talk about that. I'm going to yield the floor to anyone in the audience who wants to discuss that percentage, keeping it at 1.0 or changing it to 1.50. So with that, Wes, I'll defer to you. I know you want to speak.
Mr. Hickle, can you stay up there just one moment? Let me ask the commission if they have any questions at this time, please.
Okay.
Any questions from the commission? Mr. Bill Johnson.
I don't know if you have any way to answer this, but of all the curb and gutters in the streets in the city of Wichita, what percentage would be 1% or more?
Of streets that have curb and gutter? Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
I think it's probably a pretty high percentage, maybe in the 75%, I would think.
Okay.
Other questions? Mr. Foster?
Joe, this is a general question. As I was reading through this one more time, it dawned on me that the policy document addresses all yards. Are you comfortable staying with the concept of backyard drainage policy when it addresses all yards, or should it be residential lot drainage policy?
That's debatable. We haven't changed it because we're trying to just update the current policy. I understand your point. Maybe it could read that way, and we put a preamble and say we changed the name. So if that's what you like, we could certainly do that.
I don't think it's a big deal, but I just was curious on that.
Most of the focus seems to be in the backyards where we have had issues. So I think that's why it was called that. I think of it in my own yard when I have a swale running in my backyard that takes my neighbor's drainage, and it was designed quite well and it flows great. And whenever I see it wet, I think about the backyard drainage policy that is this document.
Mr. Green?
I just have a general comment. There was significant discussion on this item when it was presented to the subdivision committee meeting about a month and a half ago or so. And I noticed that on the agenda, it shows that the policy was approved by a 5-0 vote, and it was actually approved by a 3-2
Yes,
vote.
that should be corrected to 3-2. You're
So
correct.
just so that everybody on the commission is aware of the vote. It was a very, very tight and vote, and it was a lot of discussion on it. So that's all I had.
Mr. Richardson?
Joe, as a practical matter, when when this hits the ground, what tolerances are you aware of are given? I mean, if this policy says 1, is there a tolerance of 0.5% or 0.2%, and who decides that? Who certifies that? I think part of the concern was we may not be getting 1% even though we have it in the policy. And so I'm wondering, can you speak to that at all? Is that
Well, what I would
CBD?
offer is, the 1% seems to be working. The document under the definition of individual lot grading plan certificate does include the last part of it that says within acceptable tolerances of the individual lot grading plan. That's an MABCD function, and perhaps their tolerances that they use and accept might be incorporated into this document in a final version. And then we say that you've got to meet a minimum 1% within the tolerances specified by MAPCD.
But we don't really know what tolerances they use. Maybe Mr.
Well,
Klossmeyer can.
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Klausmer.
When, excuse me, when we have the final certification, they go off what the engineer, how it's engineered and designed. That's how we verify everything. We don't show plus or minus. We put it like it's supposed to be.
Okay.
So that's how it's verified from that. So there's not, like I say, there's no plus or minus on it. It either is there or it isn't.
Okay, all right, good,
Is or
thank you.
isn't?
Any other questions from the commission? Okay, thank you.
Okay, so
Wes?
with that, Wes?
Yep. Wes, if you'll state your name and address, and you'll have 3 minutes.
My name is Wes Scallion. I'm president of Builders Association, and we are located at 730 North Main here in Wichita. Appreciate the opportunity to speak to the commission today. As Joe has indicated when he teed this issue up, there's been quite a bit of discussion, quite a bit of review of documents and things of that nature. And I think some positive things came out of that in terms of organizing information, making sure that definitions were the same, used in different locations within the policy. This policy goes back to, as I recall, the year 2000 when Chris Carey was Director of Public Works. He used to do me a favor, and anytime he got a drainage complaint, he'd send it to me. And so we dealt with a lot of issues for a lot of time, and what we basically decided to do is that we needed to work with the city, and did, to develop what we referred to as a backyard drainage policy, and for the purpose of making sure that there was more information on the plats when the new subdivisions were platted, or the housing or otherwise, and put some safeguards in place for not only developer but builders to see that certain elevations were met during the construction. I'll just repeat it really quickly. What happens is today when a builder builds a home in a new housing subdivision, and that subdivision's been designed by some of our colleagues here in the engineering consulting business, elevations are set on that plat, and the four corner elevations are set on the lots and homes are going to be built on. And that engineered site plan is one that is used to put the footprint of the house on and taken to MABCD for a permit. We make sure as builders that when we get the foundation in place, that there's a check that's checked to make sure that we have set the lowest opening of the foundation walls at a point to where the engineered grading that's supposed to be on there can be met. Otherwise, you change it then. You know, whether you build a house and find out you got a problem, then you can't change it. And then by just practice, most developers in the area now are requiring, and have been for a time, that not only do you do that, you get that checked, when you finish the house and you put your final grade on it, the elevations are checked to make sure you've met the grading plan. Now, once we sell the house, we don't go with it. We don't have anything to do or to say about what the homeowner does. Some developers have put up signs in their subdivision that says this subdivision was built in accordance with the master grading plan. If you as a homeowner are going to do any landscaping or whatever else, you need to check with the HOA and get the information that's applicable. All that's done. I will tell you, since the year 2000, when this policy went into effect, I have dealt with, I can count them on both hands, if not one hand, the number of complaints we've had against drainage policy. We just don't have any. And invariably when we do, it's because of the landscaping that got done after the fact by a landscaper or a homeowner went in and changed something. Otherwise, it works. And the point is, if everybody's doing what they're supposed to under current policy, and we want to keep the 1% grade because it does work.
Wes? I'm sorry to interrupt. Your time is up. Would you like an additional 1 minute?
God, was that 3 minutes?
Yeah.
Let me take another breath, I'll hurry. So, and what I'm saying is that the 1% grade is adequate with all the engineering and everything else that takes place. And as an industry, we've done about everything we can do to make sure things are complied with. When we turn loose of it, we don't have any control of that, just like you won't have any control of it either. The other thing I think bears mentioning, and Gary Jensen made this point in earlier conversations, this was about the time that instead of just using surface grade and swales for drainage, clear out of an area or whatever else, we went to underground storm sewers and things of that nature, beehive receptacles and that sort of thing, so you can move water on a 1% grade to an area, it drops in and gets moved out. I really don't think this is a problem. Now, it's not to say problems don't develop, but most of the problems are in the older areas of town before this policy was ever put into effect. It's an affordability issue for us too. So we would appreciate it in efforts to try to keep housing affordable and trying to find a way to put some more affordable housing on the ground. You leave the policy the way it is.
Thank you. Can you stay at the podium just a second and make sure the commission doesn't have any questions? Okay, questions from the commission? Okay, thank you.
Talk that long on one breath.
Is there anybody else from the audience that would like to speak on this case? Joe, would you like to come up and make any additional comments? Similar to a rebuttal.
Well, my additional comments would be to be directed so that we can finish this policy and make it a final document. I'm going to remove version 12 and have the gentleman at the end of the document, Mr. Gary Jansen and Chris Labram, sign the document as the city engineer and director of MAPCD respectively, and then it would be a final document. If we are talking about changing this item H grade from 1.5 back to 1, that would be another edit I would make, and the document would be final.
Hey,
I've
Mr.
got a
Hartman.
question. George, what's the reasoning for the change in the 1.5 to 2%? Who started all that?
Well, the document that we started back in April, that is an older document, read 1.0%. That's where it was. The most recent change was at the direction of the Subdivision and Utility Advisory Committee a couple of weeks ago, and with their 3-2 vote to change it to 1.5%. So that's the official document I bring before this body today to make final. Now we may be at a point of trying to change that percent back to 1.0. So that's what the direction I need is. If that's what our collective wisdom is, then the document would read 1.0%.
Foster, you want to make a statement?
Rob, Mr. Foster brought this up at a subdivision committee and had specific examples of where he thought there was a failure of the policy or the implementation of the policy and wanted the consideration. And so it grew out of comments that Mr. Foster made at a subdivision meeting. And so that's how we got to where we are.
Did you have a comment that you wanted to make, Mr. Foster?
Save them for later.
Okay, Mr. Johnson.
Now, when that was first brought up to us, it was at 2%, wasn't it?
No, it was 1%. The original document read 1%.
No, I thought when they first come up, we discussed in subdivision 2%, and we finally agreed on 1.5%. The ones that were in favor of it. Maybe not.
The discussion was to go to the 1.5%. The 2% would be excessive. I think I'm going to go ahead and follow up on Mr. Hartman's question a little bit more and just provide some more background on this. Joe mentioned this all started in April, and I've learned that it's very important, no matter what drainage problem you get brought to you, is you always go back to what the city datum and city information is. So I requested a meeting, Neil, Joe, and Mr. Van Zant with legal sat down, and we had a particularly tough drainage problem that the client had spent 3 years one thing finally was going towards a lawsuit, and I said, you know, this is above my information. So they sat down with me, gave very good advice, and to solve the particular problem for this client involved some investigation. Well, that raised quite a few questions about the policy, and I can pass around a document that has red ink all over it with questions. But just let me give you one example. In the course of examining this drainage problem, all of the certification documents were examined from MABCD. And they had to go to quite a bit of effort to find them, but of 7 points of drainage that were looked at and certified by surveyors, only one matched the actual plat or what was on the drainage plans, only one. Since that time, information was provided whereby I spoke to some landscape contractors, and just in visiting with 2 of them and our projects themselves, more than 3,000 of these problems have been worked on here in Wichita to deal with all the drainage problems. I do want to touch base on the tolerance question because I think that's important. When the study on this started, the understanding of the tolerance was 0.3 of a foot. So let's say it went wrong on both ends. You could end up with 0.4% in somebody's backyard, and that would still be within the tolerances. So the discussion of improvement began to say, wait a minute, how do you at least get 1%? So the 1.5% is a compromise to allow for those tolerances. And what we're seeing here in terms of the tolerances in the 4-corner grading plan certification is 0.2. So frankly, if it goes wrong on both ends, you got 0.4, you can get down to 1.1% and still meet this policy on it. There's a few other items that I could address, but I'll hold those comments.
Richardson.
Joe, is there a way to change this to 1% and eliminate the tolerances so that we make sure we get 1%? Is there a way, would that be appropriate to put that in this document that understands that there are no tolerances, you gotta have 1%?
Could be. I think there's a marriage between the percent and tolerances, like Mr. Foster speaks to. The goal here is trying to get at least 1% net. And if it could be written that we get that with 0 tolerances, sometimes 0 tolerances might be pretty tough to meet. That's why I'm sure there are some tolerances that MABCD enforces.
Well, I could certainly support 1% if we can get it to where we eliminate these tolerances. That was my concern all along, was that we say 1.5, but do we really get, do we get 1? It's kind of where I think we ought to try to get to and make sure we eliminate the tolerances if we can do that in some way. And I realize you don't run MABCT, so.
Not yet.
But.
I hope not.
Yeah. It's a job you don't want.
I don't want that.
But that's kind of where I think maybe is a good compromise here.
Mr. Green.
Yeah, Joe, could you show me where the 0.2% tolerance is written in?
I don't believe it's written in here. On the first page under individual lot grading plan.
So it's in the certification statement, is that?
I guess it's on the last.
Yeah, and on the certification.
Yeah, on the Public Works and Utilities Department Engineering Division, the document that reads subdivision 4-corner grading plan certification.
Right, yep, I
In
got
that
it.
document,
Yep, I got
it
it.
does say plus or minus 0.2 tolerance.
I think if that were to be changed to no tolerance,
Changed, I'm
like
sorry.
Mr. Richardson was saying, I think that would make, it'd be helpful at least. especially if we want to go to the 1% grade on the drainage.
Mr.
No.
Klossmeyer, oh, sorry.
ahead.
Mr. Klossmeyer.
I just wanted to echo Wes's comments there about the amount of calls and everything that we get. You know, we just went through some pretty good rains here. And normally, you know, years ago, that's when we hated to go into the office. It's just not a problem now, unless it's a homeowner adjustment. And that's 99.9% of the problems that we've seen has been a homeowner going in there. Just had one not too long ago. They put a pool in the backyard, and they just raised it up, and now everybody drains to this guy's yard. He never had a problem before. So what happened? What changed? So I'm pretty adamant on keeping it to 1%.
Mr. Green.
The nice thing about the process that we went through to get this document to where it is, you know, the goal was to put the responsibility on the developer of the land, the builders, making sure that the minimum slopes and grades were met, not just by verbally saying it, but having documented surveys by either a licensed land surveyor or a civil engineer doing the surveys. And then once that final certificate of occupancy has been given, we know that at that time, everything was right. Everything was good with the world. Drainage was working the way it should. From that point forward, it takes the responsibility off of the city, because the city always gets the first call. The developer is probably the second, or the builder is the second or third call. And it's easy. It makes the whole process easier for all involved to know that once, at the point that it was built, CO has been issued, everything was right. It now becomes the responsibility of the landowner, homeowners association, or whomever changed and made the change, you know, did whatever they did to make this drainage not work. So with the 1%, with zero tolerance for the minimum, I think makes good sense and would be a good way to go moving forward.
I've just got a question.
Yes, Mr. Daly.
How about compaction through the years of the earth around the house? It should be, because you know that the disturbed soil is going to compact with rain and just age. Has that been considered? Whoever can answer that.
Mr. Klossmeyer.
That you're looking at two different things. We have a drainage in place that's a little stronger than 1% away from the house. Once it settles, and it's going to, I don't care, you can sit and compact it all you want, but it's going to settle over the years. You just fill in against that house to keep the positive drain. That's a homeowner's responsibility to take care of that as the years progress, because I've seen them, you know, in my own personal house, I've seen it 4 or 5 years later it falls. So,
Yes.
you know, you just go and make sure you get positive drainage away from your house, otherwise you're going to have a bad basement. You're going to get your basement cracked. So that
was my
really,
question.
that's maybe a tangent of this, but it's not the focus.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Joe. I will bring this back to the commission for action.
I would like to make a motion that we approve this backyard's drainage with the 1% in place.
Second it.
About the
With
zero
with
tolerance.
zero tolerance.
Okay, I have a motion by Mr. Klossmeyer, a second by Mr. Bill Johnson. Oh, I caught Mr. Johnson first. Other discussion? Mr. Foster?
I'll just throw out a broad comment. I mentioned the number of drainage problems that I and other contractors have dealt with. Since the time of this last version coming out, I've had 6 phone calls. 3 of them I've had a chance to go investigate. They're all right around that 1%. So approving this policy will only continue the drainage problems for homeowners in this city. So I don't support the motion. If you were to bring, if we had the landscape industry come in here and talk about this, their desirable percent is 2%. That's what they shoot for, and that's what they tell the homeowners. If they can get 1.5% in the sandy soil, that's great. But this will not solve the problems.
Other discussion? Mr. Green?
I know you brought it back to us for a vote. Did we actually open it up to anybody for discussion? Okay. All right. I did.
Did you have a comment? Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign.
Aye.
Foster? Just 2? Foster, Mr. Florence. Okay, motion carries 9-2. Thank you. All right, we're gonna move on to item number 4, case number CON 2019-00004. And Dave, it looks like you're up.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Dave, you're out with staff. This is a request from a company called DCCCA Inc. They are the contract buyer. This concerns the Via Christi property that is at 8901 East Orm. It's outlined in blue, and you can see here it's currently Zone GO General Office. This is presently the psychiatric facility that Via Christi operates on the east side of Wichita. Locationally, you can see this is the east turnpike exit off of Kellogg to the north onto the turnpike. What the request is, DCCA Inc. is contracted by this. They currently operate a correctional placement facility within the city of Wichita, and their intention is to consolidate their operation into this facility. The present operation currently is over on Miller Street in Delano area, much smaller facility, and this one will provide more space for their operations. And the applicant is here and can address the extent of what it is that they do. Because they are associated with and take clients through community corrections, under the zoning code is classified as a correctional placement facility, similar to what they're doing now, in an area that is adjacent to residential uses as well. This is the aerial of the property, and you can see it's a fairly large facility south of the auto dealership on Kellogg. The comprehensive plan shows it's intended for new employment. A picture of the facility. This is the existing facility looking south from Orm Street. Actually, I'm in their parking lot. This is kind of the east side of the building presently. This shows the apartments that are to the west of the facility, located in this area. And then this is looking what you see looking north, along the north side of Orm, which is the wall that separates and is the wall on the backside of the car dealership. And this is looking west along Orm. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions. As I said, the agents for the applicant are here.
Green.
Yeah, I see that the correctional placement residence general indicates that that in order to have this, it's a maximum, or more than 15 residents.
Yes, yep.
What is the maximum number of residents?
This facility, I'm not sure how many it will hold. I defer to the applicant to address that.
I didn't know if we had a requirement on the
I
maximum
don't think
number.
there's an upper limit, no.
No upper limit. Okay. Thank you, JR.
Mr. Richardson.
Dave, review with us just again, it's in our information here about the distance. The reason this is here is because it's within, is it 750 feet of a residential area?
There's
Is
a
that-
separation distance, but the property actually abuts residential property to the west. It abuts SF5 and also B zoning.
That's because it's considered a correctional facility?
Yes.
That has to have this
Well,
750 feet?
it's a correctional placement residence. It's not a correctional
Right,
facility
okay,
per
sure.
se, but
Right, okay.
Other questions from the commission? Mr. DeBoer.
That facility's been there for some time doing that, hasn't it? So why is it coming before us now?
the present operation is not classified as a correctional facility, or a correctional placement facility. That's my understanding.
And that has to do with the kind of cases that they take, they're referred there by court judgments or whatever, I think is
Yeah.
why it's a correctional as opposed to voluntary, if you will.
I mean, if there's questions about how this all works, Mr. Cox is here that could probably address how that works much better than even I could. But if you want to get a feel for what the proposed business does, I think the agent could address all that.
Any other questions from the commission? All right, thank you, Dave. If agent or applicant could come forward, state your name and address, and you will have 10 minutes to present.
Good afternoon. My name is Sandra Dixon. I'm Director of Behavioral Health Services for DECA Incorporated. We have two locations here in Wichita currently, 122 North Millwood and 1319 West May Street. Our intent is to consolidate these two locations into the Orm Street building. I will try to address some of your questions as I talk a little bit about what we intend to do. If you're not familiar with DECA, we have been around for 45 years. We're based in Lawrence. We have been operating in the Wichita community for 20 years. There are several different types of services that will be located in this building, and I'm going to review a few of them just very briefly and then spend my time on our addiction treatment services, which is the focus of this conversation. DECA provides a range of services within Kansas and Oklahoma. Included in that is prevention work with community coalitions to address issues of underage drinking, suicide prevention, and mental health promotion, and we are doing that here currently in Sedgwick County. We operate a child placing agency which recruits, trains, and supports foster parents to care for children in the foster care system, and in Sedgwick County we have about 130 foster homes that we are supporting. We operate the Kansas Traffic Safety Office, which does DUI prevention, child seat safety, offers educational programs for new drivers, including my 17-year-old, about how to drive safely on the road. And then we have a research and evaluation component, which ensures that our quality services continue to be quality. Our treatment services are really the focus of this conversation. We operate 6 addiction treatment programs in the state. That is my area of our business. Our 2 largest facilities are currently located here in Wichita. One of our facilities on May Street is Women's Recovery Center, where we specialize in serving pregnant women and women with small children. One of the unique things about Women's Recovery Center, which will transition to the Orm Street building, is we allow women to bring their children to treatment with them. So women don't have to choose between keeping their kids with somebody else or coming to treatment. We have licensed childcare on site, which will also transition to the Orm Street building so that families can stay together. Our other facility is on Millwood, just off Douglas, which serves men. One of our dreams in this new location is periodically, and maybe even today, I know a couple weeks ago, we had the father of the child at our men's facility, the mother of the child, and the child at our women's facility. And even though our facilities are currently about 2 miles apart, they could be 20 miles apart. And we hope to be able to serve families differently for family-based recovery. Last year, we served about 1,000 adults in our treatment facilities here in Wichita. 63 children were served with their moms in Wichita. We provide residential treatment. So to clarify the correctional placement issue for us, we are not a jail, we are not a halfway house, we are residential substance abuse treatment. Average length of stay, 23 to 28 days. And the reason we have this license within the city is because we have clients, about 8% of our population at any given time are referred directly by the courts. They come through community corrections, and the judge has determined that treatment is a much better option for them than incarceration. So they are court-ordered to treatment. We are not court-ordered to take them. We have the opportunity to say no. So one of the safety concerns that we hear periodically in treatment is who will be in our building. We don't take sex offenders. We are prohibited from doing that. We don't take folks who knowingly have sex offenses in their history, who have been charged or convicted of rape or murder. So the people who come to us are coming willingly and known by the court that treatment is a better option for them than sitting in jail. When they're in residence with us, they are required to have a minimum of 40 hours of activity every week. One of the expectations that the city has placed on us through this correctional placement residence and our funders place on us is that the movement of our residents are monitored 24/7. We have 24/7 staff. We have locked entry, so not anyone can get in. Staff have to let them in. We'll be putting in a brand new security system in this building, which has cameras, not in bedrooms and bathrooms, but has cameras to watch movement, has beeping on doors. If someone goes in or out a door, we know that. Every minute of their day in residence is structured. They're not allowed to leave the building without being escorted by staff. So we take the safety and security of our clients and our staff really seriously. An important thing to remember is that we will have children in this building. And kind of my mantra and the mantra of our team is that we want these children to be as safe as our own children. And so we will carefully, and we continue to carefully monitor who comes in and out of our building. Because of the nature of the business that we're in, people struggle with addiction, people struggle with mental health issues. And there are times when folks become a danger to themselves, when folks are not in a place where they can stay in our residence, and we have very specific things that we do about that. Again, staff are monitoring 24/7. We have licensed master's level therapists who are working with our clients every day. And if we believe that someone is not in a place where they can stay in our facility, we contact their probation officer, their parole officer. If there's an imminent risk, we contact law enforcement. People who are placed through this correctional placement license have very specific rules placed on them by the people who are sending them to us. If they violate one of those rules, they're gone. So we believe really strongly that safety for people coming to us is important and safety for the community is important. Rachel Harper is here with me, who is our program coordinator for our Wichita services and has been with us 14 years now. We currently operate this correctional placement residence at Options Adult Services, our men's program, have been working with J.R. Cox throughout that time. We have not had an issue. Our neighbors have not had an issue. We like being good neighbors. We hosted a meeting of the neighborhood a couple weeks ago. 3 of our neighbors came, and we want to hear from them, and we want to partner with them. So we're really excited about this new opportunity, and I'm happy to answer questions and bring Rachel up to answer questions too.
Questions from the commission? Mr. Richardson.
When you say hosted a neighborhood meeting at this facility for the neighbors of this facility or your
Yes,
current?
we did.
Okay.
It was a couple weeks ago, I think. We had it at the Holiday Inn. Ascension Via Christi is still in the building, so we couldn't do it there. But we invited neighbors to come meet us, hear what we do, hear their concerns, answer their questions.
So just to be clear, there's not a lot of in and out here every day. The people have to stay here for a period of time.
If they're in residential treatment, they're in the building unless they're escorted by staff to leave.
And do you do other than residential treatment?
We do outpatient treatment as well.
And will that occur in this building as
Yes, it
well?
will.
And sort of what's the population there? I mean, how many people would you expect to be coming in and out every day as a part of that?
We currently have, I would say, 75 people in outpatient treatment right now between our two facilities. They don't come all the time. So group is typically once or twice a week,
Okay.
late afternoon, evening. They might come for individual therapy, but the movement with that is not as often as it would be in a doctor's office, for example.
Is transit an issue? When I drove by here yesterday, and there's a really nice fully enclosed bus stop there, but I looked online, it doesn't seem to be a bus line there anymore. Is that an issue?
They come out there one time a day. We were just talking about this today. My understanding is they came twice a day before the construction on Kellogg. So that's one of our conversations we want to have with transit once we're there. But we also have vans and we transport people.
I see. So they used to make a special trip there from downtown or from your facility? Well, you weren't there, so that's not a fair question. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Klossmeyer.
You mentioned a security system and everything. Do you have a security guard?
We do not have security guards. We have 24/7 staff.
They're trained, I'm assuming, then?
Yes, yes.
Mr. Dool.
So is your company connected with Via Christi either contractually or owned by Via Christi?
No, we are not.
Other questions? Mr. Richardson.
Just curiosity, where does your funding come from?
So funding for our treatment services is varied. We are funded by Medicaid. There is a federal pot of money called the SAMHSA Block Grant, which covers treatment for the uninsured if they're at 200% of poverty. The particular population within the correctional placement residence, we have two specific contracts. One is called SB 123. It's from the Sentencing Commission, and it's treatment in lieu of incarceration, and Community Corrections manages that. And then we have a contract with federal level probation and parole to provide services to their population who is here in Wichita.
Other questions? Thank you. Is there anybody from the audience who would like to speak on this case? Sir, if you'll step up to the podium, state your name and address, and you'll have 3 minutes.
I am David Heffelfinger. I live at 8425 East Gilbert Street. This part.
Sir, if you'll stay at the podium and use the pointer,
Oh,
the
okay.
mouse, that
I'm
we're
not
recording, and we
technologically
can be able to hear
savvy,
you.
but okay, I got it. This is me right here. There was no photo in the introduction from the facility to the west. If there would have been, you'd have seen the side of my house and an outbuilding. And I've lived there since 1998. I don't come in opposition necessarily to the planned usage of these folks. I was at the Holiday Inn meeting. My opposition to it would increase if I felt like I did not get straighter answers. I can't walk into a public building without finding a sign that says there's a maximum. Whether it's a Taco Bell or a bowling alley or a bar room or a doctor's office. Every building has a maximum. I can't have 40 people living in my house. Every building has a maximum. I would like an answer to what would be the maximum if Sedgwick County downtown, county jail got so overwhelmed? Would any spillover end up next door to me? El Dorado's having riots for too many prisoners. Would any of that spillover be accepted by a facility, any facility, not necessarily these folks' intentions, But under the zoning change that you will or won't approve, any owner, and I've seen at least 3, maybe 2 in Via Christi under different masks, but come since I've lived there. So we all know I can point to a video store that's now a church, and a church that's now a flea market. So building intentions are one thing, but actual zoning which would allow what? There should be a maximum understood, I hope, by our city council and your recommendation as to it will not exceed this number of people ever under any circumstance. I think that's a fair request of me here with 480 feet. My wife and I never really have lived in darkness except for electrical blackout for either the apartments in our front yard or the lights on this facility under current usages. Will that lighting be increased anymore under the intended changes? Because we don't live in the dark now. Any one of us here, and I may be the oldest one here, could get through the fence between us in under 15 seconds if we can raise our foot.
Sir, your time is up. Would you like an additional 1 minute?
I would not try to be quick.
Okay, thank you.
Fencing, lighting, maximums. And I'm curious as to the internal usage of this. I understand there will be buildings. There will be no known pedophiles. You can't say no pedophiles. Or how do you establish that definition? No known. I'm good with, I don't stand in opposition to the intentions of this operation. I just want to know if in harder times, rougher times, failure to make bottom line profits, does this zoning give permission to whoever is running it at the time to increase numbers drastically or increase risk levels of the people they're taking in drastically? What would that maximum look like to the guy that lives next door? I'll finish by saying my property is available. I am motivated, I suspect, to look to live somewhere else. But even with that being the case, I have not said I stand here opposed. I would like more information. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Does the commission have any questions? No? Mr. Florence?
JR is standing there, and I was hoping that he could address some of those questions, those
Okay.
concerns.
JR?
Good afternoon. J.R. Cox, MAPD for the record. Terrell, your confidence in me may be overrated. I really don't know that I can answer the question on maximum. Maximums are based on the usage and the building. In the conditional use, you all could set a maximum limitation. I think they probably have a maximum limitation in mind of the people they want. The building can have any number of people it's designed for. I don't know the building codes well enough to know, based on its construction type and its layout as it currently is, or what it might modify to, what that maximum would be. But as part of the conditional use, you could set a maximum, and I think as part of the conditional use, you could also set limitations on the clientele that's involved. Did that help?
Any other questions from the commission? Thank you. Both. Is there anybody else from the audience that would like to speak on this case? Okay, seeing none, we will bring it back to the,
A rebuttal.
right. We will bring back the applicant for a 2-minute rebuttal. You thought that's what I was going to say. You all thought I was going to bring it back to the commission for action, but I was going to bring it back to the applicant.
So a couple pieces of information. I don't know if this is helpful. We currently operate 62 beds at our women's program and 48 beds at our men's program. We intend to license this facility for 80. We're actually staffed for about 80. From a funding perspective, as long as DECA is in this building, this is, just a reminder, this is treatment. This isn't jail. This isn't a halfway house. We are licensed by the state and nationally accredited to provide substance abuse treatment. short-term, intensive, help people get out in the community, have jobs, be self-sufficient, have safe housing, raise their kids. It would not be our intention, as long as we were there, to have a facility full of people who are court-ordered to treatment, because we serve a variety of people. And from a funding perspective, we couldn't afford to do that. So I can't speak for anybody after us, but as long as we are there, our priority is treatment, and we would anticipate 8 to 9% on average over the course of a year, which would be 7 or 8 people at any given time, would be court-ordered, if that's helpful.
Thank you. Mr. Flick, it's okay. Mr. Flick, Mr. Blick.
Question, you said you had
Struggled
62 beds for women at the women's site and 48 the men's. So is this going to be a combined men's and women's at this facility?
Yes.
Are you dividing the facility in half, or is it just every other room, or how's that work?
So this was built, good question. This was built as a psychiatric facility in the 80s by the charter company. And if you've not been in the building, you walk down a long hallway, you go through 2 double doors, which enter the treatment facility, which will be locked from the outside. There are central nurses stations, wing, that are all closed. And then an upstairs with 2 wings. So men and women will continue to be separated with staff in the middle.
Mr. Richardson.
Just to answer one question that the gentleman, the neighbor asked, I would suspect that you're not licensed to take prisoners from the jail should the jail become overflowed.
That is correct.
I mean, doesn't look like there's a way under this operation that that's going to happen.
That is correct. They have to meet medical necessity criteria for treatment.
And you're not part of the correctional system yourself. You're a contractor to them,
That's
if you
correct.
will. And so if they said to you, want you to take prisoners, you have the right to say, no, we aren't, and we're not licensed to do that.
And we would say, no, we're not.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Hartman.
Do you know if the St. Francis facility, how many beds they operated at one time?
I don't know.
How many existing rooms are there now?
We selected 80 because I believe there are 40 rooms with double occupancy. I believe Ascension was operating at 70. I think that's the number they were operating at.
Hey, Mr. Foster? And then,
Yeah, I just want to follow up on, you'd mentioned the 80, or at one point you mentioned moms with children. Are the 80 we're talking about specifically those in treatment?
Yes. And that includes kids.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Hartman.
One more question. Now, the 80, would you be agreeable to set the limit at 80?
There's not space for more than 80.
So as far as the conditional use, if we put 80 as a maximum, would you be okay with that?
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Daly.
I've got one, I think it's staff, that there was a question from the neighbor that if this facility quit using this building, could it be used at a more intensive, maybe correctional use? Or is it limited, or can we limit it to just say that it's for this purpose?
Well, the correctional residence specifically does not allow it to become a correctional facility.
Thank you.
So it would
Okay.
take a zone change to do that, irrespective of ownership.
Thank you.
Mr. Florence?
Would you have any facilities that deal with a family unit as a whole?
So that's one of our dreams. There is one wing that we might look at in the future, where we would have family suites.
Other questions? Mr. Foster?
Just to follow up on a question from the gentleman who spoke, he mentioned lighting. Do you anticipate some changes of the site itself, or things going to remain the
We
same?
do not.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? I'd simply like to say that I appreciate that the work that you're doing with the work that I do in the community. I know that there's a growing need to serve families where there's addiction issues, so thank you.
I would echo those comments. Thank you for what you do. Most of us, frankly, wouldn't have the guts to do it, so I appreciate that.
Thank you. We appreciate the opportunity to be here today.
Okay, thank you. With that, we will bring it back to the commission for action this time.
I move for approval with the limitation of 80 maximum on this facility.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Mr. Hartman and a second by Mr. Blick. I'm gonna get it right this time. Other discussion? Mr. Richardson?
I just wonder, ma'am, could you come back to the podium just for a minute? Even though you don't anticipate more than 80, I kind of hate to see us set a hard number that maybe we should say 100 or something a little above that, so you don't get locked into, you want to change the way you operate. I think what we're trying to do is just eliminate stuff in the place full of people, and so I'm wondering if maybe Mr. Hartman would consider going up to 90 or 100. Would that be helpful, you think, or are you comfortable with 80?
So 80 residential beds is very comfortable for us. The physical plant does not allow for more than that unless we change some of the office space, which is outside of the double doors, into residential beds, and we don't anticipate doing that.
Okay, all right.
Any other discussion? Okay, if not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay, motion carries. Moving on to agenda item number 7, case number ZON 2019-00006.
Good afternoon. My name is Philip Zievenbergen with planning staff. First comment I want to make is you all have a revised staff report in front of you. Mr.
Philip,
Richardson.
Can you wait just a second?
All right.
Was there just a question on this case, or you wanted to hear this case? Okay, carry on. Sorry. You're
Gonna
going
do
to
that to
get
me
to
twice in
present
a
a full
row?
case today, we promise.
Yes, okay, sounds good. Like I said, you guys all have a revised staff report in front of you for this case. Mr. Richardson pointed out a discrepancy in the original that was submitted to you in the mail out, so I will be going off of the revised staff report. This case is a zoning case to amend PO number 300 on a property located north of West Maple, approximately 400 feet west of Ridge Road. It's basically near the Ashley Park HOA. The amendment to the PO is to allow limited restaurant use, and I'll go into some of the details. And really, I'll defer to the agent who is here representing the applicant to discuss those details even further. This case has this property has an extensive case history. I'm not going to go through all the details of the applicant looking to provide restaurant uses on this site in the past. I feel like this is more of a compromise to allow this site to be more marketable, to have the current retail building have full occupancy at some point in time. The amendment to the PO would be to allow a restaurant use that is permitted within the NR district that allows a restaurant up to 2,000 square feet to occupy the building. And the second point to the amendment would be to limit the type of use that the restaurant could do, prohibiting drive-throughs as well as prohibiting deep fat frying operations. And with that, I can stand for any questions, and truly I would defer more to the applicant and agent to go into the details of what they envision those restaurant uses to be.
All right, questions from the commission.
You know,
Mr. Richardson.
how do we enforce no deep fat frying? I mean, we're into the, you know, who does that? I mean,
As we, staff kind of talked about in our staff meeting today, I believe that would probably come through the permitting process of not allowing them to, install hoods, things of that nature that would have to be required in order to have frying operations in the building.
Well, I think to have any kind of cooking, you're going to have a hood, whether it's frying or not. If you're going to have a commercial kitchen.
Correct, and that's where I would defer to the applicant or agent to explain what types of operations they'd be having related to restaurant uses.
I don't ever recall us getting into that level of detail in a restaurant. Do you, Dale?
No, as I understand it, and Philip can correct me if I'm wrong, but this is something the applicant requested. Staff didn't come up with this.
Correct.
Well, I think it's probably a reasonable idea. I'm just not sure going forward how we, how we make this happen. And my concern here is that, as we've learned, you cannot protest odors coming from off-site if it's for food preparation in the city of Wichita. So once this becomes a restaurant, the neighbors are stuck. The neighbors are stuck with it. They will not be able to protest it, except if they know it's not supposed to have a deep fry operation, because the staff has told us that if you don't like the smell, if it's coming from food, no matter what kind, you get to live with it as a neighbor. So it's going to be tough, I think, to enforce it, but we'll let the applicant talk to that.
Other questions? Thank you. And if we could have agent or applicant come forward, state your name and address, and you have 10 minutes.
Levi Bond, Caw Valley Engineering, 200 North Emporia, agent for the applicant who is in attendance. Also the future tenant, the possible future tenant is in attendance as well. This particular site, we're seeking to amend the PO to allow limited restaurant uses, as Philip was discussing earlier. This potential tenant would have one convection oven, and then other than that, it'd be baked goods from the convection oven, cookie dough, edible cookie dough, and ice cream is what he's seeking to serve. That's kind of what we were trying to accomplish with how we wrote the PO. I think that when you go to pull the building permit to finish it out, because all of these are unfinished spaces, all of the potential lease spaces are unfinished still, it can be solved then, and they could not allow, grease traps to go in, has to comply with not being able to have a hood. Be open to any suggestions on that, and if you'd like to hear from the future tenant, he'd be willing to speak to his operation as well.
So how do you suggest that we write this so that it's limited, so we don't have cooking orders? Frankly, this case is sort of death by a thousand cuts. This thing's been before us time and time again. And we settled on no restaurants last time in order to get this approved, and obviously the owner built it understanding, and it's been completed how long? 2 months, 3 months?
I would ask the applicant to speak to that. 3 months, year and a half. And he has one tenant in right now, I believe.
Well, again, that's how we got to this place, was an agreement not to have a restaurant. And I just don't know how you control it going forward, to say we're only going to have one convection oven in there. And it's going to get lost. Unless somebody complains, we know we don't have enforcement. So it's going to be a tough one, I think. So anyway, thank you.
Other questions by the commission? All right, thank you. Is there anybody from the audience that would like to speak on this case? Okay. Are you the applicant?
I'm the potential future tenant, but I'm not the applicant.
Okay. If you'll just step forward and state your name and address, and you'll have 3 minutes.
Good afternoon. My name is Cliff Bragg, 1001 North Roosevelt. I think the word that keeps coming up is a restaurant, sir, and you're saying, how do you enforce a restaurant use? There's a lot of enforcement on that. I own a current restaurant, Milk Float, that's in Delano. I know what a full kitchen looks like and all the requirements for that, and this is very far from that. There's no hood pumping out any kind of smells. There's no frying going on. It's a restaurant just like a Starbucks would be a restaurant. And then take it 2 steps back that there's no drive-through. The restaurant category is so broad that it really makes nuance in discussion very challenging, but it is a very nuanced situation that I am asking you to consider. This is something also that will add tremendous value to the neighborhood. As I have experienced with my current establishment, it's something that is bringing significant value to our current neighborhood, and families love it. This is it's a tremendous opportunity, is what I'm trying to convey. And through engineers can speak on this thing, you can absolutely enforce all of that. If there's a writ that you cannot have a hood, that you cannot have grease collection, like a 1,000-gallon, 1,500-gallon underground interceptor, like a full-service restaurant could never go in under any circumstances ever. So again, we're dealing with a broad category, and I'm actually asking the commission for nuance on that, like to think of it in a much more delineated, detailed way than, okay, it's a restaurant. It's not that. And, we hope to be there if we can with approval for 20 years, but if it's more short-lived than that, any one future potential tenant would have to abide by all of those regulations that are put in place. Engineers have to come in, they have to approve plans, plans have to go to the city. So that's all I have on that. Just wanted to add a little more detail to that. Thank you.
Mr. Florence.
Sit in.
Mr. Florence, got to get up to your mic.
Yeah, I'm sorry. How many, will you have tables and chairs for people to?
Yes, sir.
In the restaurant?
Yes, sir.
You know how many you plan?
We're planning on 30 or fewer. You're very welcome.
Other questions from the commission? Mr. Richardson.
Couple of questions. One, when we get a restaurant deal, we got different parking requirements. Are we going to be able to meet those?
That's for me?
Well, no.
Excuse me, I'm sorry.
It's for the staff.
Parking requirements were dealt with in previous case history. Let me look through my staff report here. Off the top of my head, as I was writing the staff report, I don't remember what the exact details were. The site, it has sufficient parking for all uses related to the site. There are no separate regulations on if it's a restaurant use in neighborhood retail versus a different use in neighborhood retail. It's all based on square footage, and a restaurant use up to 2,000 square feet. Again, I don't have the details right in front of me, but we can look those up. When I was doing the calculation, the current site has sufficient parking.
Don't we have, I don't know, Scott, can you help? Don't restaurants carry an override based on how many seats they have, or?
That's correct. And if he, excuse me, if he had 30 seats, he'd be required 10 spaces.
10 spaces. How many parking spaces are out there?
I found it here. There's 32 spaces.
Okay. And would that allow enough then for the rest of the, I don't know, how many square feet are you proposing for the restaurant?
1,800.
1,800. Okay. The second question was, Dale, Scott, is there a way to write this so that it gets enforced? I'm not concerned about this gentleman. I'm concerned about the next person that's in there, and 10 years from now, all of a sudden, we have a whole different use. And
I would recommend that we not permit a restaurant, but not allow a restaurant that has a type 1 ventilation hood or a grease interceptor.
Either one of those, is that, okay, a type 1 ventilation system?
Right, and that's the type that collects cooking with grease.
Okay.
And then the grease interceptor is required if you cook with grease as well.
All right, okay, thank you.
Other questions from the commission? Mr. Blick.
So is everything made out of convection oven, or are you bringing it from another facility and stocking it there? How's that work?
Great question. The very few items on our menu that have to be baked will be baked in a single deck convection oven, and that would be cookies and brownies only. And everything else is, I mean, if we're talking about edible cookie dough is made in a mixing bowl, and we're bringing in ice cream.
All right.
So it's that's fairly straightforward there.
Sign me up. Yeah.
Yeah, it's let's start handing out coupons. No, I did. To your point, good sir, you mentioned the grease interceptor. That would be another city concern, because a lot of times they do a just flat requirement, and so that's another thing that should have a nuanced discussion. But sometimes they just automatically, oh, you're serving candy bars here, grease interceptor. They don't really look at it any other way. But the hood is something that can certainly be a restriction very easily.
Questions from the commission? All right, thank you.
And I can confirm, I have reviewed plans where the health department has said, might there be a restaurant in this building ever? And the question was yes, and they said, well, you have to put in a grease interceptor.
Is there anybody else from the audience that would like to speak on this case? And if agent or applicant would like to come back for a rebuttal?
Wasn't really
No.
speaking in opposition.
Okay. All right, we'll bring it back to the commission for action. Mr. Blick?
I'd make a motion to approve, with the exception of a type 1 ventilation that could not be on that facility.
Second.
I have a motion by Mr. Blick and a second by Mr. Bill Johnson. Discussion? All right, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries 11-0.
Made the second. That was Blick made the motion, right?
Mr. Bill Johnson. All right, moving on to agenda item number 8, case number DER 2018-00003. And Mary is here to present.
Right, well, good afternoon, Madam Chair and Commissioners. I'm Mary Hunt from the MAPD here. Today, I am asking you to set the public hearing for Wichita Places for People. Places for People is an action step of our comprehensive plan. Our Urban Infill Advisory Committee recommended approval of this plan and asked it to come forward to you for consideration. And just to let you know, I left a flyer on your table there. We're going to have an April 9th open house over at the Advanced Learning Library on April 9th, and I hope people can attend that. So all of you have had a copy of the plan for quite some time now, several months, probably about 6 months now. But I'm just going to take a few minutes here to do some of the highlights of the plan to refresh your memory. I know those of you on the Advanced Plan Committee saw a presentation, but this is actually shorter than that. So here we go. So the purpose of the plan is putting people first rather than automobiles, connecting the neighborhoods to commercial centers. It's transportation for everyone and having these active centers. And the reason we're doing is we want to take better care of what we have, revitalize our community, take advantage of all that existing infrastructure that we have, and focus on our established neighborhoods, and then also address some of the regulatory barriers that keep development from happening. So happening where? Here's a map of Wichita with some of our surrounding suburbs, and then the red line shows what's called the established central area. It's about 62 square miles, about a 3-mile diameter outside of the downtown core. Okay, just a reminder of where that is. Just some quick facts. That 62 square miles is about 38% of Wichita. It has slightly more than half of all our residents, and subsequently slightly more than half of our households. It holds almost 2/3 of all our jobs and has slightly, fewer of retail sales in that area because a lot of that has spread to the edges. So basically we have 3 place types, and they're categorized by size. We have small, medium, and large. So we have our neighborhood hub. An example is 13th and West. We have the community core, slightly larger. That would be like Delano. And we have a regional center, which is the largest of them, and Central and Hillside near Wesley would be a great example of that. What we have is called a nodal development pattern, and you have 3 areas to that node, and you have the very center, the node, that's the most intense development. You have a transition area, that little halo area that goes out from there, and that blends out into the edge, and the edge are where the residential activities are. So again, here's our established central area. That was a term that was set with the comprehensive plan back in 15 and 16. And this shows you the location of all of these type, or what they'd call our place types based on size. And you can see they're pretty evenly scattered throughout this area. Okay. So we've got small places. It's called a neighborhood hub. Examples of this, because on small places, there's like 26 of them, I think, in the plan, but 17th and Hillside, 13th and Broadway, et cetera. They tend to be located at an intersection, no bigger than maybe a couple of blocks, 40,000 square feet of commercial space. Unless you have a grocery store, then it's double that. And you have about a 1.5 mile trade area. So it's fairly small. And this is just a rendering of what a neighborhood hub could look like. This happens to be, let me think, 17th. Yeah, let me look here. Yeah, neighborhood, I think this is 17th and Hillside. But it just shows you that you can have people walking, people biking, some people using the bus, having streetscapes so people can have a seat. It's a pleasant environment, but it's incorporating all kinds of transportation all in one place. And here's just a street view of that intersection, of what it could look like. And you notice the buildings really aren't that tall. The maximum is about 3 stories. So that's the small version. And this is what nodal development would look like on a schematic at 17th and Hillside. You notice we've got the university there on the upper right. So that very center, that darkest purple, that doesn't reach out to there. But you've got the very center, which is the highest intensity development, and then you got the lighter purple spreading out there. That's your transition area. And then this one shows a really large residential edge. So then we go up to medium-sized places or community core. Again, Harry and Oliver, Delano, these are good examples that could be or already exist. It's maybe a couple of intersections, 6 to 12 blocks. We got more commercial space all the way up to 250,000, and it needs about 50,000 people to support it, and people are willing to travel about 4 to 6 miles to use it. Again, a bird's eye view of that. A little more intensity. We've got some buildings. Here, look, I can get this. There we go. Like, we've got, multi-story building up here, right at the top. Goes back more than one building position from the intersection. But again, we've got a plaza there for some, just some gathering spaces for people, pedestrians, cars, bikes, etc. And they're all working together. Again, this is a street view of that same rendering. This one's at Harry and Oliver, just an example. Again, you'll notice that very outside area, the lightest of the color. Yeah, I see if I, down here. It just doesn't go out as far as some of them, but the center area is a little bit bigger. And then we have our largest places. This is the regional center, and we have fewer of them. I think the plan only calls for 6. But those are places like, Wichita State, Old Town, the malls on either side of the city, et cetera. Again, the number of blocks that it includes rises. The amount of commercial space has to be greater than 200,000 typically, multiple anchors. It also has institution and employment centers. And you need more than a 10-mile trade area and 100,000 people or so to support it. Here's a regional center. Okay. The buildings are higher. There's just more intense use there. Again, but we're including some kind of plaza space over here on the lower left, et cetera. So very much like the others, just at a bigger scale. And then here's just a street view of that same one. And the nodal development on this, we deliberately asked our consultant to look at this spot. This is Town West Mall. And it's kind of in a transition phase. It's still open, but not fully occupied. Typically, we would say that Maple and West would be the intersection. But on this one, we moved it off of there, and you can see where that big purple block is in the middle. That's actually at Tracy and Taft, because it's really in the middle of that whole commercial development. And then it breaks out there again with the transition zone, which is just a lower density type development, less intense, and then out to the neighborhoods. Okay, so what do you need to build this stuff? We have components, and in the plan they call it typologies, but they're basically the buildings and their frontages, it's streets and sidewalks, and it's open space, and they all work together. And so I'm just going to take you through some of the buildings that they've laid out as a typology. We've got our detached house here on the left with the garage kind of poking out front. That's a newer building. You got the detached house in a neighborhood with the garage pulled back. That one's older. And then we got a more compact house. We got a duplex. We've got our accessory dwelling unit there in the backyard, although we all know accessory apartments can actually be built into the building you have. And then what we do is shift here on the multi-unit house. These have separate entrances, okay? Then we go to a row house, just a few more, again, separate entrances. And then we shift to the small apartment or the walk-up. This is where it shifts to a common entrance, and they have a shared hallway. And that same thing happens on the mid-rise apartments and the high-rise. And then we have our apartment complex with a lot of green space. Then we move on to the commercial buildings. We have a live-work unit where somebody has a business on the first floor, but they live upstairs or they rent out apartments upstairs. Got a small-scale commercial, very, very common in the Delano area and throughout the area, except in Delano they might not have those windows because they're attached to another building. Got a mixed use here where we might have an office downstairs and some residents upstairs. And then a medium-scale mixed use, again, maybe some retail or office on the first floor, an apartment complex or apartment building upstairs. And then large scale is just the same, but more of it. And we've got the pad site drive-through. And then we have our big box store and a parking garage. And the advantage of a parking garage is like what happens in Old Town, where all of these individual businesses, they're not all having to provide their own individual parking. The development is done where they can share the parking. And so from the building, you have what's the front of the building. And those are called your frontage types. And they're very important because they're the ones that connect the street to the building so that they all kind of function together. We've got the suburban yard. You got a nice long driveway. The house is pulled back a bit, or you have your neighborhood yard where they've pushed the garage to the back, and then the house is a little bit closer to the street. We have what's called a build-to-street, where all the homes are kind of clustered together with the parking on the rear. Then we have the courtyard kind of setup, again, parking on the rear, except the eye is taken down the very center corridor that connects all of these buildings. Then we have the terrace, which looks like one of the others, but it's just how they're treating the front of that building with some great landscaping, again, parking on the back. And then we have our last one, which is called the buffer, where we have buffering on the back, parking on all sides, and then some landscaping on the front. So those are the frontage types. And again, what we're trying to do here is we've got our building here on the left. We've got the frontage zone, where we're going to have some sort of treatment there. Got a place for people to walk. Got the amenity zone, which can be landscaping, street lights, park benches, things like that. You know, a place for somebody to sit down and rest for a bit. And then the curb zone that leads to the street. So here we have our streets and sidewalks. And it's showing how one side of the roadway on the left hooks up with the other side of the street. So it's all functioning together. And an example of mixed use is Delano. Then we have the next one, which is called mixed use connector, because it's handling a little more traffic. That's East Harry's a great example of that. We've got the residential connector, which are those kind of collector streets that lead to neighborhoods. And we've got North Oliver here doing it. And you can see along North Oliver how nice it would be if somebody could actually walk from the left side of the street to the east side of the street. really can't do that right this minute. And then we have the residential neighborhood, which is the least intense, and Salina Street is a very good example of that. Then we have plaza streets like we have in Old Town, and then we have these things called active alleys. And you can see on that gallery alley there on the lower right, they've got stringed lights hanging around there and making that a nice public gathering space. Then the last part, of course, is open space. And we have a natural preserve, no playground equipment or anything like that, just some nice green space buffering up to that neighborhood. We've got the linear park, like going along the Arkansas River. Got a community park, nice walking distance for the neighborhood, but a little bit smaller than that first one. Then we have the neighborhood park here, which actually has some playground equipment, so that can have some active green space. We have the square, which is all those on the left here, all those buildings surrounding that green space. And then we have something called the plaza courtyard or courtyard, and that might have a little bit more intense a treatment, like with bricks instead of just grass. So that's kind of how you build these areas and the how that's laid out. And then we have some recommendations. One of them is our residential zoning code. One of them is to do those accessory apartments or accessory dwelling units by right instead of coming here to get permission to have one. Eliminating the density cap. Having appropriate limits on the building scale so it doesn't get so huge. Using the building type standards that we would eventually develop. And then design guidance for human scale, making sure those buildings that they relate to the streetscape. Then on commercial, we would if we can start working on the zoning code, is change the required setbacks, have appropriate limits on the scale, having multiple small scale projects rather than one just big huge thing, and then design guidance for human scale development. I know we had that on the last one, but it applies here as well. And we try to move parking to the back or the back and the sides of buildings rather than the front. And it all depends upon if you're in that center area, that node, or if you're in the transition area or the edge. As you get to the edge, yeah, you can have parking on the front or the side. So what we're looking here is the plan provides us with some options. And one of them is, and this is regarding zoning, we could have a walkable development standard as an option, which we're starting to call, a parallel zoning code. Or we could allow some of these things in specific locations using a location criteria, or require it only in specific contexts with an overlay tool, or require it based on a specific plan. We would eventually have to make a decision on which of these we're going to go with and what it might mean for us. And then the other one, of course, recommendation is establishing a land bank. And if you're going to establish a land bank, and many, many communities have them, what they do is they acquire, hold, and manage these distressed properties. Many of them are abandoned or tax foreclosed property, and just procedurally, they just get all gunked up because nothing can be done with them. Develop a plan to reuse or rehab that property. We create it through a city ordinance because the state allows us to do so. And it is then managed by an independent agency. And then we have our collection of investment tools that we've had for a long time. We use them in many circumstances. There's nothing new with these, but these too would apply in this area. And so, happy to take questions or comments.
All right, questions from the commission. Mr. Richardson.
Mary, just to be clear, the inclusion of this in the comprehensive plan still means we have to go back and amend the zoning ordinance or whatever we do to implement this as a whole separate procedure. Is that correct?
That is correct. If we want to implement the ideas here,
okay,
we must move on and adjust our zoning code to make that happen. But that's a separate action. It doesn't change zoning just because we choose to adopt these concepts.
So what we do is we say we want to do this, then we allow ourselves a lot more work to figure out how to make it happen
That's true.
by changing the code. So
Yes.
we will not have heard the last of this by any stretch of the imagination if we move forward.
That's correct.
Just to be clear, we're really approving the concept, if you will, and then we've got to figure out how to implement it. That's a fair statement?
That is perfectly stated.
Okay, thank
We
you.
have work to do.
We?
We have work to do, yes. Mr. Foster?
When the planning commission considers the factors, will staff then need to, as part of their report, examine this since it's part of the comprehensive plan and make note of that? So we'll consider it?
I missed the first part of that, I'm sorry. Could you repeat?
Given that this would be part of the comprehensive plan, and one of the factors in a case relates specifically to the comprehensive plan, will staff need to now then double-check this document so that that is part of the report, so we know that going into a case?
Yes, it would, if it's inside the established central area. Yes.
You have a question?
Nope.
Okay. If there's no other questions, then I will bring this back to the commission for action.
I move we set the public hearing date of Thursday, May 9th for the adoption of Wichita Places for People Plan.
Second.
I have a motion by Mr. Hartman, a second by Mr. Green. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay, motion carries 11-0. Thank you, Mary.
Welcome.
All right, moving on to agenda item number 9, tiny homes action and notification. Mr. Russell, Mr. Hamker? Hamaker? If you'll state your name and address, and you'll have 10 minutes.
All right. Hello, Commission. My name's Russ Hamker, 2206 South Ironstone Street. Thank you again for hearing me again today. I know I've been here a few times. So, Dale, thank you again for allowing all this. I know this discussion's about tiny homes here, and I kind of want to recap a few things. I know most of you guys have heard a lot of this already, though.
Sir, can you state your address, please?
Oh, I said it was 2206 South Ironstone.
Thank you.
I apologize.
That's okay.
All right, so to recap here a little bit, so I moved into Wichita here and built a house shortly after, and built it out in the Sierra Hills division, where my address is at now. I built it out there intentionally so that the property value would increase, and it was also at the edge of the city intentionally so that it was a nice quiet area. It's also in an upscale neighborhood as well, so I was hoping my property value would increase, and sure enough, a lot more houses got built around my area recently, and my property values increased. Hey, great. So I come before you guys today because not just by myself, but also we have a large group of people that I also represent as well. I have about 600 homeowners that altogether have signed a petition about tiny homes. And again, you guys kind of heard a little bit about that here in the past as well. We have 200 homes in Sierra Hills where I live. We have 120 homes in Equestrian Estates, which is just north of us, and about 40 homes in Cambria. So you guys add that up, that's not the 600 number there. We have about the 5 square mile area. Basically, we took a consensus, and basically every single person was pretty against tiny homes and pretty frustrated with the matter. Now, you guys approved a tiny home community to be built at 143rd and Harry specifically. That's what this kind of started off with, but it's kind of more broad than that as well. But to the point, though, still, my area, a lot of the people are up in arms about this. Still, I hear fire and pitchforks every day almost anymore. I hear about fighting. I see discussions on Nextdoor, if you guys know that. And a lot of people pretty upset about tiny homes in general. Not necessarily the ones that are coming behind my house, but I think a lot of people are worried about them getting built, close to them as well. One of the other problems that we're having in our own area right now is homes aren't selling. We have one home that's about 700 feet from where Tiny Homes is supposed to be built at here, and it's gone through 4 realtor companies. No one will look at the house even. I've had multiple realtors come out and talk to you guys in the past as well. They've also talked to you guys about how we've had a lot of problems with nobody wanting to look at homes or buy homes in our area because of this issue. So on to actually the issue itself here. So myself included here with this, tiny homes are dissimilar enough to some standard homes that I think we need to look at doing zoning regulations and different rules for them. A lot of people have discussed this with me, that they compare it to multifamily homes, duplexes, or trailer homes. I've had a lot of people talk about how it's just a more expensive version of a trailer area. One of the things too that the tiny homes itself is equivalent to today. So we see a lot of duplexes in the area, right? In duplex communities specifically. The tiny homes equivalent right now for the 15 acres that they have, they're going to have 90 homes on that small area there. So again, a lot of people are comparing this to trailer parks because of that. One of the things that was brought up as well in previous discussions was there are quite a few cities in Kansas that already have regulations for tiny homes. Andover, Derby, Overland Park, just to name a few. Many of the cities in Kansas as well also have a minimum requirement for small homes, 800 square feet being that number. Right now, the tiny homes are below that number that are planned to be built here close to me. And I know there's a couple other communities that have been discussed, I know right now in the city. Again, we have some kind of frustration points with that from the 800 square foot. So with that said, I want to open it up for discussion more than anything else with you guys. I have other points I want to talk about as well, but I want to talk about zoning in general and what MAPC can do to help the Wichita public to, keep this under control and make everybody's happy about it.
Well, could you go ahead and complete making your points?
Okay, I can do that, no problem, okay.
Then I'll open it up to questions from the commission.
Okay, well, I'm going to put up some questions. That's what I'm going to do to you guys then to think about. So, and I already kind of went over it once already again, the MAPC, how are you guys going to protect the citizens' property values in regards to tiny homes? That's one thing that a lot of people have asked me. MAPC, how are you guys going to protect home sales? That's another problem as well. We also have had a lot of people talk about crime rates with tiny homes, is that there's a lot more homes, a lot more people in a smaller space. They have to worry about crime rates going up. How is the MAPC going to help field that? Another one that was brought up, and I'm included in this as well, so my kids go to the school right there next to tiny homes where it's planned to be built, is what is the MAPC planning to do for zoning or regulations around schools to help with traffic and crime and all that as well. And then just in general, again, back to traffic, a lot of people have complained to me about traffic, and I want to know what the MAPC is going to do to help take care of that. So with that, I'll hand it over back to you guys.
Foster.
Dale, I'm trying to remember back, you had mentioned a figure that through MABCD, someone could have a house at 150 square feet. Is that correct?
That's correct. You have to have a 75 square foot living area, and then there is an approximately 35 square foot area for a bathroom. Can be larger. There's a minimum distance from the toilet to the sink and that sort of stuff, but roughly 35 square feet. And then the kitchen area has to be 35 square feet. So theoretically, you could build a code compliant home on a permanent foundation at 150 square feet.
So coming back to your comment, tell us a little bit more about where the figure of 800 comes from.
Well, 800 is actually coming from other organizations like yourselves. So, Andover, Derby, Overland Park, they actually incepted these specific numbers as well. That was not me. I didn't make that number up. I'm just gone through and looked up their information and presented it. Now, you guys have also done your all's own assessment of that square footage amount and found quite a few cities in Kansas that have that. And 800, 700, somewhere in there has been that number. Right now, you guys have 150, so my closet could be a house.
Mr. Florence.
Have you did any research for other communities that have allowed small, tiny houses and see what type of effects they had on property value and the issues that you brought up?
Sure. Yeah. So great question. Thank you. So yes, I've done quite a bit, and a lot of the different communities in our local area, they've put up similar regulations for them so that they have a comparable to trailer homes specifically, and they've put a lot of rules and regulations in for something similar to that. And because of that, you don't see these communities popping up because it wasn't cost effective at that point to put them up. And that's what the whole point of tiny homes is to be cheap and deep.
Blick.
So by the sound of it, you're not a fan of affordable homes?
I'm totally a fan of affordable homes.
Just not in your area?
No, I am not for my property value being degraded substantially. So that's one of the reasons I am primarily up here as well, is my property value looks to lose 20%. I've had multiple different realtors tell me that, and it might lose more at this point. I mean, I have a great example of a house that's down the street from me that it can't sell. People won't look at it. I'm very concerned. I mean, if I wanted to sell my house today, I might not be able to sell it at all. For over a year, we have one in Cambria that hasn't been able to sell now for like 8 months.
So when was your addition built where you're located right now?
Approximately 5.5, 6 years ago. I apologize. I don't know the exact, but
before that, it was farmland?
That's correct.
So the farmer that was out there, they now see an increase of traffic because 5 years later, there was a development that was made, correct?
No, they sold their property to make that.
Other farmers around there or anything?
I don't think there's really not much other farmland that's directly by my neighborhood now at all. We have a couple of different stables primarily. I wouldn't count those as farmland specifically.
We see this throughout Wichita where when you go further east and west, north and south, new development, and we see complaints with traffic and all that. Well, that's just growth.
No, I agree with that statement there, but no, this is not the same thing in my opinion. So you have home neighborhoods and you also have tiny homes, which is a totally separate thing. So you guys have approved 90 homes and 15 acres. So the grand plan for this, that I understand it from the developer, is to do over 900 homes on his lot on that 143rd and Harry location. So 900 homes is not equivalent to my 190 homes approximately that are actually in Sierra Hills. So
do you see that with affordable housing or tiny homes, they're usually less vehicles, or they're more vehicles than somebody that has $150,000 or $200,000 house?
I would say they'd be the exact same. I mean, it's designed to handle at least 2 people, if not more.
Okay.
So I know myself, I have other personal concerns about tiny homes that, for regulation purposes, how many people can live in a house? Someone else brought that up at another discussion point, and
well, you mentioned more traffic, and so that's why I was trying to.
No, sure, I understand.
Are
That's a great point.
Big multiplexes, and there's, we're talking tiny homes where it's usually 1 to 2 cars. That's the same as a residential area where you're at, where there's 1 to 2 cars. So if it sounds like it's about the same.
So you're talking 1,800 cars versus 400 cars is what my math is trying to come up with. So that's why I'm talking about that specifically. That's great. But 1,800 cars versus 400 cars in my neighborhood versus that one, that's a pretty large difference and a very large amount of traffic difference. And excessive is the word I'll use.
Mr. Richardson.
Several comments. One, a question back to you. If this had been rezoned multifamily for a large apartment complex, how would you feel about that?
I would feel like that was probably the same thing. I would probably want to be concerned about property values, at least with that. I'm not going to lie. I mean, I'm still up here because of my property value for my house and everybody else's in the whole area. I think the biggest thing, though, is really came down to, and you guys talked about it here, I think, on the actual agenda is notification specifically. We didn't have any notification. It just happened. You guys approved it. Everything went under the covers, if you will, for everybody else. No one knew about it at all. It just happened.
Well, okay, so the answer to my question is, unless it's houses of your same size, you think it would decrease your property values?
Well, so I would agree with that statement in the means of yes. I'm not saying my same size. Even a $150,000 standard house is going to equate to more evenly sell my house for the property value that it's at today. And that's because that's going to be all dealing with the real estate market in general there.
But there's a number of things that could go on this site, and none of which probably would satisfy your 600 people unless they were comparable in quality, expense, lot size, et cetera, et cetera.
So I apologize, I disagree with you because I don't just represent people of my house size. I represent people that have $100,000 homes. represent people that have $150,000 homes today.
Okay, so, but if
they're standard homes.
If we had an apartment complex, that, in your opinion, would decrease your property values, number one.
It would be, but it would be definitely less.
Yeah. Let's go back and start over here, because you understand that this group does not set minimum standards for what the size of a house is going to be. We heard a subdivision plat is why it got to us. Any number of things could be built on those lots. As I recall, up to a 1,600 square foot house on those same lots. And what I'm hearing you say is, if it were a more expensive place on those lots, you'd be all right with it. So we don't control what goes on there.
Nope, I agree with that, okay.
And so I guess if you want to limit tiny homes, you're probably in the wrong place.
Okay.
You need to be talking to the city commission and say, we need to change the building code that only allows 800 square foot houses in the city of Wichita.
Okay, well, maybe that might be the
I
case.
suppose you could ask this group to ask the city commission to do that. I'm not sure that you'd probably get a positive vote. I don't know how we would feel about that.
Okay.
But all we do is talk about land development, and that we see a lot of plats with that many square feet per site, and you could build a 1,600 square feet or 3,200 if you want to make it two-story.
Okay.
That's up to the person who buys the lot and the builder who decides to do that. What this particular person said was, gee, I think maybe I'd like to put tiny homes on these. We don't have anything to do with that at this point, and we can't solve your problem. We don't set the building code. We don't administer the building code. We don't say how big the houses have to be. We simply look at the lot standards, access, utility easements, street widths, those kinds of things.
Okay, well, you guys did mention though 1,600 square feet specifically was allowed on that, up to that.
And that's because of the size of the lot.
Okay.
It's lot coverage.
Well, I think it should be at least required. I'm just asking this discussion again here that I think the MAPC should put, saying, hey, what is this being used for? Is it being used for tiny homes? Well, you have a restriction requirement on it to be X amount of space. That's what I'm trying to find out about. What can you guys do to help citizens of Wichita to put those kind of rules into place? But it sounds like I need to talk to some other people, is what it sounds like to me from what you're telling me.
That would be my point. I'd confer to the staff here and maybe.
Mr. Foster.
Trying to remember on this particular one at 143rd there, I don't recall a zoning case on that. Was there one?
There wasn't a zoning case because they did the requested annexation, and when it's either RR or SF20 and it's annexed, it's automatically converted as part of the annexation process to SF5 per the zoning code. So there was no zoning case.
It was a subdivision case, yeah.
That's what I recall. No, I just throw out one quick idea, and that is you know, the general idea of zoning is to protect property values. It's an insurance policy on value. And I think it's an appropriate question. If you really want to protect property value, do you go a step further and get into the issue of square footage on structural development within zones? I've seen it done, but, you know.
I guess what I would tell you, and I don't know whether Mr. Hammaker is aware of this, but the Tuesday morning at the county commission staff meeting, they had a discussion about this at the request of Commissioner Howell. And at the end of the discussion, there was no interest on the part of the majority of the county commissioners to do anything to change the regulations at this point.
Mr. Klossmeyer?
Yeah, I think there's a slippery slope you can fall down here by limiting what people can do with their own property. And, you know, I think property rights has something to do with this. And, you know, if they're, you know, they decide, just like Mr. Richardson said, if they decide to put an apartment complex over there, you know, you know, you can't, I don't know, I don't think it's our job to sit there and tell people what they can put on their ground.
You guys mind if I comment back at least? Or is that appropriate?
Mr. Green, do you have a question?
Just a second, I'll let him respond to that.
go ahead.
I've got a question.
You guys kind of commented there about annexation there. So that was one of the pieces of this as well. Now, do you guys control annexation? Is that correct? No. Okay, you guys shake your head no. Okay. So I was under the impression that you guys also help with that process as well.
The Metropolitan Area Planning Department processes requested annexations. Well, we do all the annexations. It's just requested annexations and unilaterals don't come to the Planning Commission for a ruling or a recommendation. We just, as staff, do it on behalf of the City Council, and we handle it that way. But the MAPC has never asked on a requested annexation whether it's appropriate or not.
Okay, I just didn't know if one of the things that was commented, and Jim Howe talked about it as well, was about annexation, about no more unilateral annexations in general. The public need to be made aware. There needed to be public hearings and all that. I know this is the place to talk about that. I apologize. I mean to click that there.
Green?
Yeah, there was a passing comment about there was no notification when this issue came up. Could staff maybe expand on the
On the
process?
plat, certainly, I mean, right now, the current MAPC policy is the red and white development application signs that have to go up 13 days prior to subdivision for plats and 13 days prior to, for zoning cases. There is no individual mailed notice like there is with a zone change on a plat, and as far as that goes.
There was notification, though.
Sign was up. It had dropped, when I was out there and saw it, it had dropped down to the bottom of the stakes, but it had been up at one point.
Other questions from the commission? Wes, did you have anything you'd like to comment on this case? I mean, you're here.
Sure, thank you.
I understand the gentleman's concerns. I think it's a bigger issue than just whether or not you may lose some value with your homes. If you're losing the value, it probably isn't any bigger issue. But at the end of the day, I think the tiny home phenomenon, if you want to call it that, is growing across the country. It's becoming more acceptable in some parts of the country than others. And in many cases, it's led by the affordability of trying to create a place where some units are affordable for people like in Aspen. They've got a tiny home project up there, and they're on trailers or RVs. They're not tiny homes because if you put a property on a foundation, they can't move it. It's real estate. Otherwise, it's an RV. And they brought some in. They bought in California. They paid $100,000 a piece, I understand, for those units, and they rent those to the workers who can't afford to live in the area anymore. That's what they use them for, because they've got to have people to run those ski resorts and what have you. So they rent for about $1,200 a month, and they're tied into sewer and that sort of thing. So it's by necessity in some of these places that they're starting to look at allowing smaller homes because there's not enough places for people to live in decent housing, not enough decent housing available that's livable for these people. So you're going to see varied things in different places across the country. I want to speak to this issue in relation to some of the thoughts we brought up and discussed with our Urban Infill Advisory Committee on the possibility or the feasibility of allowing smaller homes to be put in the established central area of the city as by right or even through a conditional use process. Because when you some of these neighborhoods where the properties are older, the yards are bigger, and they may be challenged in terms of the viability, it makes sense that if you have a child or that needs to be close to the family or an elderly person, your mother-in-law, whatever, that you could build an accessory dwelling unit and have them close by. And in many cases, that would be an improvement to what's there today, and it would help turn these neighborhoods around. Tiny homes by the building code that was adopted in Wichita, the 2018 IRC has an Appendix Q in it. And that Q says a tiny home is anything under 500 square feet. Anything over 500 square feet is smaller housing. It's built to the same building code regardless of the size. The only difference is with tiny homes, there are certain allowances made for escape hatches and other things, depending on the height of the building, the shape of the roof, that sort of thing, because they are smaller and the space is utilized a little bit differently, but they're still deemed to be habitable. The other thing is I think there's not a hue and cry out there that I see for someone wanting to buy a bunch of property, plat it, put in sewer and water and infrastructure and everything else, and build really small homes on it, because you can't make any money doing that. You go broke, and the project just doesn't work that way. So this is the one that's out east that you're talking about that got all the attention. It raised people's awareness level, I think, that the issue, rather than being someplace else, was a little closer now and they might think about it. I've heard mixed reviews from people, including real estate agents that sell at all price ranges. The market will probably take care of this in time. But it's the fear factor that's being talked about right now. And I'm not saying that isn't legitimate, it is. But time will tell. I just don't want to see anything done to put limitations on what we've been trying to do to create more activity in the established central area of the community, because I think the time's right for it. We don't want to go backwards after we spent all this time trying to put a plan in place. And, you can embrace that and a lot of other variables that you need to in order to create viability in those communities again. So my concern has to do primarily with the established central area. I think location is the issue when it comes to smaller homes, no question about it. And just so happens this one's in a place that's surrounded by, or in close proximity to pretty expensive homes. I understand the concern. But by the same token, I agree with Don, a slippery slope. You want to be careful starting to set sizes and all the other stuff, because tomorrow there could be some other people say, well, 850 is not big enough. It needs to be 1,200 square feet. And then you erode affordability just like that, and you can't get back there. The one thing the tiny home phenomenon has done, I think it's caused developers and builders to look at the scale of housing, the size of housing, the demographics of communities, and what would people want in terms of buying something that's more affordable than they can buy otherwise. I have a friend, and I've told some of you this, he's a developer in Atlanta. Atlanta is a high-price market for entry-level homes, about $200,000. He bought 8 acres out by the airport, the current airport, that used to be just junk property. Finally, it all got scraped off and everything else he bought. He's going to put 60, what he calls tiny homes in there. They're 500 square foot to 1,000 square feet. The price is 100 to 200,000. He's got a waiting list of 400 people, and he hadn't opened it yet. It's a designed community. It's platted. It has protective covenants. It has amenities, trees, and things like that. But he says it's getting to the point with that population growth that we're not having here, that people need to look at options. And out of those looking at options and looking at things that we're not used to seeing, they're a little bit challenging, comes innovation. I hope that continues.
Thanks, Wes. I have one question, just out of curiosity. What's the price range for houses in the housing development that you're in?
They kind of range, but it's 300,000 on and up. They go up as high as 600 though in mine. Cambria in comparison, they're 400 to $1 million. Let's see, equestrian, they're pretty equivalent to Sierra Hills. I think 250 to 5. There's also quite a few other neighborhoods though that I represent outside of that as well, and they range anywhere from 100 to 300,000 in the close vicinity.
Okay, thank you. Other questions from the commission? All right, thank you for coming in today
Thank you.
and presenting to us. All right, we're going to. Oh, do we need to see that? Would you all like to hear the comments from the lady that's here?
Well, why not?
Time to come here.
Okay.
As long as,
She suffered through two.
as long as it's different from what we've already heard.
Agenda item.
Ma'am, if you'll state your name and address.
My name is Sylvia McCombs. I live at 14216 East Timberlake Road. That's in the Spring Hollow edition.
Thank you. You'll have 3 minutes, and we'd like to hear different information than what has already been presented, if you
Thank you.
would, please.
I would like to tell you a little bit about my background, though. I did serve as a CFO for a local, very busy auction company here in Wichita. I have a lot of knowledge about property values and what drives them. I've served on 2 HOA boards at a large condominium here in Wichita, and also I'm very aware what protects property values. And I think the commission's duty to us is to try to help homeowners preserve those values. Some of the things that concern me, number one, I am just north of the proposed development. I'm not sure I quite have the math right, but I know I'm very close. A residence in Wichita is allowed to have 2 dogs. If the current area we live in, my lot is 1/3 of an acre, and I'm probably on the small side in my neighborhood. Many of the homes in my neighborhood are 1/2 acre. We moved there for a reason, okay? We wanted the large lots. We wanted low-density housing. The housing in the area is all like, kind, and quality. Many of the neighborhoods have a brick facade, maybe 50% facade requirement. So there's a lot of very cohesive neighborhoods that all come together in that area. It's a suburban life. I can sit on my porch and I can hear the horses at Equestrian Estates whinny. And that's why I bought my house there. And my biggest fear, yes, is that property values will go down. If you take and triple the density of a home, in my neighborhood, you would have 8 dogs to an acre. You would have 24 dogs to an acre. Take what they're going to do in the tiny home community, and can you imagine the number of dogs per acre that you potentially might have? So I want you to consider that your mission and your actual commission is called the Planning Commission. Tiny homes are new to this area. It's untried, it's untested. We can't let this go forward without careful thought and put our seatbelt on after it goes bad. And I firmly believe it will go bad for a number of reasons. Mr. Gallion touched on this. There is a right place, right time for tiny homes. In Aspen, when you have a tiny home, you have a large green area. Tiny homes are for 2 people, 2 different groups. Either the folks in the city, and I know there's homeless in Wichita. Let's put tiny homes in urban Wichita, downtown, and let's get people off the streets and put them in tiny homes. Or it's the people that want to live off the grid. They want to move in the country. They don't want to be controlled by rules, okay? You get 90 homes in there on a small area, it has to be controlled. It flies in the face of the tiny home concept. They're trying to mesh 2 different things together.
Your time is up. Would you like an additional 1 minute?
Yes, I would. Thank you. In response to somebody who asked the former gentleman, oh, so you're against affordable housing? I can tell you that spending 10 years in real estate, there's plenty of affordable housing in Wichita. You can buy a 1,000 square foot all brick ranch house with a 1-car garage for $60,000.
Why would you want to pay $200 a square foot? What lender is going to lend on that? And after you're too old to climb that ladder, who's going to buy that from you when they can't finance it? So I'm asking the board, the planning commission, to please put the seatbelt on, take some time, and figure out what we can do to make the tiny home movement be successful in Wichita. Right place, right time. Those building codes in other cities are there for a reason, and they're working. But to just blindly allow the equivalent of a she shed to be built in the suburban area next to 400,000 or 500,000, 600,000 homes is irresponsible at best. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions from the commission? All right, thank you very much. With that, we will adjourn this part of the MAPC meeting and move on to the BZA. Agenda item number 1, BZA 2018-0069. We are going to hear this case.
Good afternoon, Matt Williams, Associate Planner. This is BZA 2018-69, variance to reduce the interior side setback from 6 feet to 0 feet for a carport structure located northeast of 31st Street and Stevenson Avenue, or South Everett Avenue. This is located at 3140 South Bennett. The application requests the reduction of the side yard setback from 6 feet to 0 feet. The carport had already been built at the time of application. This case was first heard by the BZA on January 10th. The action of the BZA was to defer the request for 60 days to allow the applicant to work with the Metropolitan Area Building and Construction Department on getting a building permit for the structure. Following the BZA, the applicant was able to have that structure inspected and received building permits, with the only issue arising being that the structure was built along the property line within the setback. Prior to scheduling this case, I spoke with the applicant about potential remedies that they would be willing to offer to help the problem, and they indicated their willingness to install 5-inch splash guards in addition to the existing guttering. This would help with some of the water runoff. I also received some emails and phone calls from some residents in support of the structure. I received some comments that you have and you were sent today about one of the neighbors who has issues with the structure. Should the board determine that all 5 conditions necessary to grant this variance can be found, the recommendation of staff is to grant the variance with the recommendations in the staff report. Here's a picture of that carport structure again. If you want to see any other pictures, I'd be happy to pull those back up.
Richardson. Mr.
Matt,
Richardson has a question.
just to be clear, there is now guttering on the north side. Is that right? The north side of the carport.
Nothing has been added since the last thing that I know of. The applicant did say that they would be willing to put a splash guard along the guttering.
But there is guttering there.
Yes, yes. But the guttering is also over the property line, as I understand.
Okay.
Other questions from the commission? Mr. Florence?
He's actually on the other person's property, am I correct?
I believe the carport structure is built up along the property line, with the guttering that was added afterward is actually over the property line.
Nothing's been done since that point in time.
Correct.
Like that. Okay.
Other questions from the commission? Okay, I will have agent or applicant step forward. Will state your name and address. You'll have 10 minutes.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Adib Michael, 3915 East 28th Street North, Wichita, Kansas. I think Mr. Williams said everything that I can say. We continuing from the last meeting that the board decided to give us a chance to get the building inspected and get the building permit and get it inspected, which we have done. So that's the only thing that's changed. We're just pending, hopefully, your approval to get the variance so we can move on and put the splash guard, which, I talked to a very, like one of the best expert in guttering system in Wichita, and he owns a guttering business in Wichita, and he told me the best way to eliminate this problem for the oversplash on the neighbor's yard is to mount this splash guard, which is, basically 5-inch extension, so no matter how hard the rain will be, it will backsplash to the roof and then come back to the gutters again. The gutter size itself is sufficient. We can also put a wider gutter, but it's not needed at this point. So hopefully this will be enough for us to get the variance accepted and keep the structure.
Thank you. Questions from the commission?
Got a question of legal. If a tree limb comes from your neighbor's over into your yard, you can cut it off at the yard line, can't you? At the property line?
Pretty much.
So why couldn't you do the same thing to the guttering?
There is a standard that allows for that, but it also restricts causing damage to the other property. For example, like the tree example you gave, if you cut the tree limb back to the line, but you kill the tree, you're still responsible for the damage you caused to the tree. So that makes it, a legal answer. So in this case here,
That's not what Judge Judy says.
believe me, I like Judge Judy.
Or Judge Maryland.
Yeah. This would be a similar situation. I mean, the gutter extends over the property line. The adjoining property owner can't go up and rip it off because he's causing damage to the property. So, but we don't have, the commission wouldn't have authority to allow a variance across the property line. So there we are.
Mr. Dewell?
Well, I have another legal question, and that is, I think that we do not have the authority to approve any type of a structure that goes over a property line onto somebody else's property.
I would say correct.
I have a follow-up on my guttering thing. So this is legal and builders.
Okay.
Why couldn't the guttering be put on the roof? Like it appears like it's on the house itself. It's actually up a little bit from the roof, that white area, that's what it appears to be. But if you could put the guttering at the very edge on the roof and run it back or forward, and it would be over there, over the property line, then it wouldn't be intruding over the property line, but adjoining there. The builders and the legal can deal with that. Well, not if you flash it.
Is that a question for me?
Mr. Daly, who would you like to answer that question?
Anybody that can.
Well, this far from a legal standpoint, I mean, if you have control up to the property line, so if you get creative with that, that's the builder's side.
Mr. Klossmeyer says he has an answer.
I don't know if I got that. I've got another question. Kind of piggybacking on Mr. Dewell's. We can't approve the structure anyway. Our job is to approve the variance. That's all our job is to do. My question would be, if the structure is existing, are we in effect approving a structure that's encroaching? If we approve the variance,
It's encroaching, yes, you would be.
then we're approving something that's not basically legal.
Correct.
Other questions from the commission? Okay. Oh, wait, Mr. Green.
Has there been a survey done to verify where this structure is located with regards, I see a wood lath there, and I assume that that's where the property line is located, and
Yes, we do have a survey, and there should be a copy on the file with it, and it is on the property line. And so from my understanding now, the problem is that the gutters is outside the property line. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So if we would, basically hypothetically approve or grant the variance pending moving the gutters or moving the whole building 1 foot, which is going to be more than enough to be out of the property line and away from the neighbor's line, will that solve the problem?
Yes.
Then we're willing to do this with no problem.
Mr. Hartman.
A question for Dale. In order for this variance to be approved, it has to meet all 5 of these
All 5, yes.
requirements.
Yes.
Because from what I see, it doesn't meet like any of them, or maybe 1 or 2 of them. So I don't know how we can approve this thing if it doesn't, being unique, it's not unique in my estimation. I mean, you see carports everywhere that are built within the setbacks. Adjacent property are adverse harm. I see it being an adverse harm to the neighbor's property with the drainage, and I think even with the shade that this provides on his grass, he's going to have a problem with his grass. And as far as a hardship, I don't see the hardship. So I don't see how we can approve this without meeting all 5 of these recommendations.
All I was going to suggest was that if there was an inclination to approve it, then one of the ways you could do that, because after hearing from the lawyer, you can't approve something that is hanging over somebody else's property, is you could approve it subject to them resolving the guttering issue and require them to come back with some confirmation that the guttering has been taken care of, because as I understand it, the structure is on the applicant's property. It's just the gutter that's hanging over. But if there's an inclination that you want to deny it, well, then certainly that's a whole different deal. But I just was throwing that out.
Any other questions from the commission? Okay, thank you, sir. Is there anybody from the audience that would like to speak on this case? Sir, if you'll step forward to the podium, state your name and address, and you'll have 3 minutes.
I don't know how to operate this thing.
Also use the
I
arrow
want it
keys.
on that, no, the other one. No, it's the one over here. There.
Okay.
Okay, my name is Merle McCullough. I live at 3134 Bennett Avenue, and I thank you for hearing the defense of my property. In the past 3 years, over $26,000 has been spent on our house, along with another $23,000 in the prior 10 years. Refurbishing and upgrading has made our home as new as any 60-year-old house can be. My wife and I are both in our 80s and likely will be selling our home of 55 years in the near future. Unfortunately, for the last summer, we've been putting up with a structure that was built on the property line without a permit. That structure has already caused physical damage to our property and continues to do so to this day, along with degrading the curb appeal of our home. My wife and I have both suffered mental anguish over this. The situation has been made even worse by an out-of-nowhere claim by Mrs. Oak of a medical need for a structure. That need was not mentioned when Mrs. Oak told me she was going to build a carport because she was tired of carrying her groceries into the house when it was raining. That medical need was not mentioned when the city inspector originally told Mrs. Oak she had to tear the structure down because of several code violations. That medical need was not mentioned when Mrs. Oak confronted me after the city inspector visit, only telling me I was denying her protection for her vehicles and costing her the $10,000 she said it cost to build the structure. The contractor is already committed to covering any cost in removing the structure, so that burden has been removed from Mrs. Oak. Only after facing the fact Mrs. Oak was possibly going to have to tear the structure down did Mrs. Oaks come up with an alleged unique health condition that has to be explained further than medically necessary. Up until about October 16th, 2018, Mrs. Oaks visited our house once or twice a week to bring us up on her life and concerns. Not once during her visits did Mrs. Oaks ever express concern over her health, except for one minor procedure, nor did she ever show signs of a disability. What kind of a doctor would prescribe a prescription that would cover overhead protection for a person going from her car to her kitchen door, but not be valid for any other area in her travels? Mrs. Oak still moves unaided and uncovered in the neighborhood without using even an umbrella or sunglasses. Facts. The guttering on the structure does hang over our property. Fact, there is no way to maintain the structure on the north side without trespassing on McCullough's property. McCullough's property is exposed to devaluation because of Mrs. Oak's alleged medical problem. Have you ever heard the old saying, it's easier to ask for forgiveness than it is permission? That's what we have in play here. Mrs. Oak claims she relied on the contractor to know the rules. Hogwash. Every property owner should know their boundaries and billing allowances.
Mr. McCullough, your
Yes.
time is up. Would you like an additional 1 minute?
Please, thanks. The contractor said he never built a carport on the side of a house before. That's another absurdity. You can't even breathe in this town without getting a permit. I believe if Mrs. Oaks had applied for a permit before building, she would have been turned down. Both parties are at fault here, and now they want forgiveness for their professed ignorance and have hoped that to be blessed with a favorable ruling. I just got my tax bill the other day, and it went up many thousands of dollars. I'm sure with this thing being planked on the property line, people who maybe want to buy our house will think twice. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Questions from the commission? Okay. Mr. McCullough, thank you. Is there anybody else from the audience that would like to speak on this case? If you'll, ma'am, you're the applicant, correct? Okay. You had time when the agent or applicant was able to speak at the first 10 minutes. Is there anybody else that would like to speak on this case? Okay, ma'am, what you can do is you can have the 2 minutes rebuttal if you'd like to take that instead of the gentleman that presented during the 10 minutes. If you'll step forward and state your name and address, and again, you'll have 2 minutes.
My name is Karen Oak. I live at 3140 South Bennett. We did build the carport for a medical reason. I have had a serious car accident in 2016 which resulted in neck surgery. I have also had several epidurals in my lower back. Mr. McCullough knew this, but that's not here nor there. The point being is that this carport is not doing any damage per se to his property, as pictures that I have right here, taken today. On the south side of this carport, the carport is shading or protecting his bushes. Now, I'm with Mr. Adib Michaels that we can move the carport probably safely 6 inches, where the guttering will be right over our property or on our driveway. I would also like to have the guttering on the downspout turned in so it can be drained on our property and he doesn't come over and grab it in order to mow. But I do have a medical condition, and it is documented well with a bay with Kansas Spine Hospital, and with several doctors. Thank you.
Questions from the commission? Thank you, ma'am. Go on, Mr. Green. All right, I'm going to bring this back to the commission for action. Mr. Blick,
I make a motion to deny, based off of what we've heard from our attorney and a structure being over on somebody else's and approving it. So I make a motion for denial.
Second.
I'll second too.
okay, I have a motion by Mr. Blick, a second by Mr. Brule, a comment by Mr. Bill Johnson.
Well, I think I'm gonna make a substitute motion, and the main reason being, when they were here before, we directed them to get a permit, which they did, and had to come back and show us. I think I would like to make a motion to approve, as long as they get the gutter moved back on their property, turn the downspouts, and put the deflectors or whatever it was called on the roof to keep the water from going over on the neighbor's property. So that's my motion, substitute motion.
Second.
Okay, I have a substitute motion by Mr. Johnson to approve and a second by Mr. Klossmeyer. So all in favor of that?
Let's have some
I'm
discussion.
sorry, discussion.
How far would they need to move that in your?
I don't know the size of the gutter, but I would think it's probably 6 inches. No, and the last stipulation that is, and then they'd have to prove that they had got it moved back.
Okay,
So it's a question for the staff or legal. Is there a way to put a temporary time on this, such time as the applicant no longer a residence, medical needs gone, gets it taken down? I know that complicates it. I just want to know if that's possible.
Good luck.
Nobody says no? Okay. He's shaking his head no.
Mr. Jewell.
A question, Mr. Johnson. This would also include compliance with the other 5 items, right, as staff recommended?
Well, I was kind of going by what Dale said, the approach we could take on it.
Matt can correct me, but I don't know I don't think that the 5 items on there would be in conflict with Mr. Johnson's motion.
I don't want to get in a debate about whether there's medical conditions or not medical conditions. That's not.
The only thing I wondered is, do you want to add a time frame to the motion that in 60, 90, whatever time frame you think is appropriate?
6 months.
6 months.
I've got a comment too about the 5 conditions on the public interest there that general welfare, harmonious development of the community, and it's certainly not harmonious there. So, and I don't think it's general welfare because of the neighbor. So I don't think it covers that public interest. That's my comment. And I'm not Judge Judy.
Mr. Florence.
This is something, if you're gonna move it, they can do that this weekend. 6 months is entirely too long. So, if you're gonna allow it, do it in a reasonable period of time so that we can get rid of this.
Mr. Bill Johnson.
What's a reasonable time?
2 weeks?
I'd say a month.
Other discussion? All right,
Who was the second on that motion?
Mr. Klossmeyer.
Which one we're gonna go first on the second motion or first motion?
The substitute motion, yes.
Okay.
That the substitute motion would be to approve. So all in favor of the substitute motion to approve, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Okay, so we're gonna have to have, we're gonna need a show of hands for all of those who approve. So we've got 3 and opposed. Okay.
5, 6. So it must be 4 to 6.
It was 3-7. Okay, we're gonna go back to the original motion then, and that original motion is to deny. Is there any other discussion before we vote on that motion? Okay, seeing none. All in favor of the denial, say aye.
Aye.
Show of hands, please.
6, 7, so it's just the reverse.
All opposed, same sign? Or just the 3? Okay, motion carries. 3-7-3. Did I get that right? Thank you. It's denied. All right, with item number 2, I did not ask whether or not you wanted to hear this case. I would like to hear this case, though, so we will hear this case. Philip?
Good afternoon, Philip Zievenbergen, Associate Planner. I have an application for a variance to reduce the side setback from 3 feet to 0.8 feet on a garage that is recently constructed. It's generally located east of Woodlawn and north of Central. You can see here on the map. The garage is constructed at the time of the application. What's unique about this case is the applicant did get all applicable permits and even got a certificate of occupancy from MAPC for this. The story of this case is that upon completion of the construction of the garage, as well as the fence and the driveway, the neighbor to the south, their lawyer provided the applicant with a letter stating that the driveway and the fence was on his property. Subsequently, after that, the applicant did change the location of the fence and removed the portion of the concrete from his neighbor's property in request of that letter. The variance is not in relation to the driveway or the fence. It is only about the garage that is in the back corner of the yard that you can see from the site plan. This is an official survey proving that all aspects of this building, including the guttering overhangs, are within the property, and that's what the setback will be set to at 0.8 feet. I just have more. So this is inside the front gate there. From the back, you can see where the fence is in relation to the driveway or into the garage. This is just a detail up on the overhang and the guttering related to the side yard. And this is looking behind the garage, looking at it in relation to the back of the property as well as the downspout drainage. So if the BZA shows that all 5 points are met, it is in staff's opinion that this variance should be granted to reduce the side yard setback from 3 feet to 0.8 feet. And I can stand for any questions.
Questions from the commission? Mr. Blick?
Just a quick question on the page 6 that with the document, and you said that everything's been surveyed. That photo just looks kind of illusional, so that's not up against there, up that fence. That's
Right. This document was provided by the applicant and agent, and it is an official survey. I mean, you're looking at, we're reducing the side yard setback to 0.8 feet, so it is going to be very close to the property line. But according to the survey, that 0.8 encompasses even the overhangs of the building.
Other questions from the commission?
And the applicant is here to talk about this case as well.
Other questions? If agent or applicant could please step forward, state your name and address, and you will have 10 minutes.
I'll go through any of these pictures if you want.
Maroon Faisal, 656 North Brookfield. I wasn't planning on saying anything. The contractor had to leave on a medical emergency. I apologize, wasted your time on an innocent mistake. We moved into this house about, do I have time? I moved into this house about in 2018, early 2018. Went next door and introduced myself to my next door, lovely, hateful, racist neighbor. And I told him who I was and moved in next door to him, and he set me up, basically. The GIS showed the property line is the tree line. Previous owner stated that the tree line is the property line. We proceeded in building the garage. I told him there's an existing fence where this fence is, and told him I'm gonna build a garage and a fence. And he said, oh yeah, I was gonna build a fence. So we went ahead and proceeded. He waited until the garage was completed and the concrete work. And obviously we pulled all required permits. And soon after, I received a letter from his lawyer that the concrete, as you see on the right here, was 4 inches on his property line. Innocent mistake. Costed me thousands of dollars on moving the fence and the concrete, and just to make him happy. He said our tree was over his house, got that taken care of, got a tree trimming guy, got that taken care of. All his trees are on my yard, but I love trees. Obviously, you saw how we went around that tree. But anyways, and just recently, it doesn't apply to this, but he sent a letter for several neighborhoods in the area stating that meet your new neighbors, myself, my wife, and we have a 12-year-old boy. He said, meet your new neighbors. They're Iranian couple, and they're spies. So this case was turned over to the FBI and Wichita PD and my department. I'm a Sedgwick County firefighter. As a matter of fact, I'm a lieutenant for Sedgwick County Fire. But you gotta be the bigger person. I don't tolerate hate or racism, but sometimes you gotta take people as they are, and I'm sure there's bad weed in every stack. So anyways, bottom line, we complied and we applied for every permit. Everything was signed off, and he set us up, waited until we completed every project. And his recent one, the 2 weeks ago, the letter for the whole neighborhood stating that we're spies and I was born in Lebanon, but I grew up in Wichita. So anyways, proud to be here and proud to have the freedom to express your, what you have on your mind and all. Anyways, I don't have anything further. We're compliant, we're on our property, and the reason why I'm here is it was an innocent mistake. I took his word for it that the tree is the property line. We proceeded, and he waited until we finished, completed the project, and then he said, he didn't say anything. He sent a letter from the lawyer saying that we're on his property. He was correct, but I took his word for it, went ahead and got it surveyed, moved everything that was on his property, and now we're compliant with everything. That's it.
Thank you. Questions from the commission? Okay, thank you. Is there anybody from the audience that wants to speak on this case? Nope, okay. We'll come back to the commission for action.
Move approval.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion to approve by Mr. Dool, a second by Mr. Blick, and a question by Mr. Richardson.
Imagine that.
This is the first question you've asked.
It is, I'm sorry. Dale, I mean, the elephant in the room here is how do you get a building permit to build something that's obviously over, and as I understand, accessory structures, the easements, setbacks 3 feet as opposed to 6, is?
Yeah, if it's in the rear half of the yard.
Okay, all right. So one of the things I meant to do was to say, why don't you have somebody from what we used to call central inspection come tell us how this happens. I mean, I understand if you get a building permit, they come out and they inspect it and they say it's okay, that it's something certain and rely on. I don't know, maybe the contractors in the room could tell me how that works. Does nobody, I mean, you just look at the building itself as opposed to where it is? Is there a way to avoid this in the future, really is what
I've never accompanied
I don't know.
anybody
Bill,
on
you have a thought on that?
inspection.
Yeah, good luck. I mean, we see all kinds of cases where something's been built and they have to come in and get a variance because it was slightly off. I mean, I guess from my standpoint, if we got any doubt at all, it's going to be staked and surveyed. Now, second to saying that, we've had some surveys that done, and we went and looked and thought there's no way that this is right, and it sure as heck wasn't. So there's no guarantee.
I just wondered if it, you know, when they pull a building permit, if that's not part of their review, I guess is what, and if it's not, it certainly should be, would have avoided this problem in the beginning.
There was probably a site plan that showed that it was off, and now the survey, it appears to me, if I understand it right, the overhang's 0.8 feet off of the property line.
Yeah.
So I don't see an issue.
Mr. Foster, and then I'll get to you, Mr. Florence.
I guess I want to get some clarification here. There's two things. The detail that we're looking at from the survey, it appears that the rear of the structure is encroaching into the 8-foot easement of the rear yard.
Whatever this is.
So should not the vacation request include a vacation of easement as well? That's question one. And question two is, if you look at the bottom of that detail, it says building is 0.8 feet northeast of southeast line. Roof overhang 1.1 feet southeast of southeast line. Does not the roof overhang go across the property line then? I'm looking for some clarification on those things.
That's certainly a good question. I don't know if Philip knows or not. Maybe the applicant can.
Let's ask the applicant to come back.
Or can you come back so we can ask a question, please? Thank you.
On the drawing, there's a dimension 0.8 feet off the property line. Is that to the edge of the overhang, or is that to the build?
The 0.8 or the 1.1 or?
Looking at this
No,
detail
this one.
down here.
I see.
There's a 0.8, and this is the.
What I would say, Mr. Foster, is just looking at this, the
Okay.
overhang appears at the closest place
Okay.
to be what I would consider to be the right front corner.
Mm-hmm.
According to the survey,
Yes,
it's
sir.
1 inch, 1 1/10 inch away from the property line is the way I'm reading this.
Okay.
It's 1.1 inch and not 1.1 foot.
Well, I can't read that, but just
Yeah.
looking at the drawing and trying to figure out where the lines are,
I think it's 1.1 inch.
Foot, that's a foot.
I had to do the math on 0.8 of a foot because I didn't know what that was. It's 9.6 inches.
But if it's southeast of the southwest line, it's over the property line.
I'm sorry, I apologize if I didn't answer your question, but the contractor had, like I said, had to leave on a medical emergency, but I can clarify this for you.
I'll interject a question related to the easement. If there is indeed an encroachment into the easement, do
He
we
could-
not have to have another
Well,
case?
or he could get a hold harmless through Public Works. Given whatever that distance is, I'm sure he could get a hold harmless.
Mr. Blick?
Question I have is, you know where you said you had to come in 4 feet, did you 4 inches or 4 feet, did you
That
move
was
your
on the-
fence? How much did you move your fence in versus that photo where it showed?
It was in inches, and it was, oh, there we go. We had to cut the concrete and move this portion of the fence.
Moved that 4 inches towards your house, is that what you did?
Towards the north, correct? towards the house, our house.
So then the photo that's on the back, it shows that fence right there, back up one, right there. Is that fence right up against the structure? Because it's kind of hard to tell in the photo. So you don't have a fence on the actual,
I may have some pictures on my phone. No, everything as it sits now should be 8 inches on our side. I may have a better picture on my phone.
You want to know if the fence stops at the garage or keeps
Yes.
on going?
yes, that's what I want to know. If the fence
this
stops
way?
right at the garage.
Does the fence stop at the garage, or is there a fence up against the garage
That's what I'm
wall?
trying to see here. It looks like there's a sideway piece. It may butt up right to the garage.
That fence over more, or is that where it's at right now?
This fence was not touched, sir. Let me
That's
see.
the updated photo.
Correct, this is an updated photo. Can I?
4 inches of moving it in already.
Yes, sir, but
I
if you
think he
see,
just moved in the front fence where he's 4
if you
inches
see
over.
here, the line is not, the property line is not parallel to the driveway. It's kind of like crooked like that.
Other questions? Mr. Florence? No?
I got mine answered.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
Mr. Daly?
On page 3, and it has inspection type and description. This is for legal and staff. I want Dale to hear this, so when we get through. On page 3 of the inspections, it has, the 110 is the setback inspection, and it's signed off by B. Reynolds.
But
And so something's wrong there, that it shouldn't have been signed off, but it was. And so I think B. Reynolds has some questions of his boss to do. And am I reading this right, that B. Reynolds was supposedly the one that inspected it, or maybe just by phone, he took somebody's word for it?
I literally haven't ever gone with anybody on an inspection.
No, I mean,
to
am I
go.
reading the sheet that B. Reynolds was
That's
the
the
one
way
that
I would
signed
read
off?
it, but again, since I don't administer this, I'm not positive, but that's what I would assume.
All right, any other discussion? If not,
Actually, I think we need some information from B. Reynolds of what happened and why it happened, and from his boss of why this is allowed to go on.
thank you, Mr. Daly. However, we do have a motion and second on the floor, so if there's no other discussion, I would like to call for a vote.
What was the motion?
Approve.
Motion was to approve.
Well, I'd like to make a substitute motion that we postpone this until we get some answers from why B. Reynolds approved this, and from his supervisor, why this is allowed to go on and what should happen.
Yes, I mean, certainly we could ask them to come. I guess what I'm thinking is the inspection part is a separate issue of whether it's done properly versus the request for the variance. I mean, you got a legitimate application. If you think it's not appropriate, then vote against it. But I'm not sure asking someone to explain if they actually messed up on the inspection, how that's going to change your view of the request. But that's just me.
Is there a second for that motion? No, for the substitute motion. Okay, motion dies for lack of a second. Mr. Foster?
Am I allowed to offer another substitute motion? I'm in favor of the variance itself, but I think it needs to be cleaned up. And I think that would include proving it subject to what Dale mentioned, the hold harmless agreement for the easement, and then clarification by MABCD on that question about the overhang issue.
I'd second that.
Okay. We have a substitute motion with a second. Any other discussion?
Just a question, when you say a clarification on the overhang, does that mean it's going to come back to us?
Well, if it
They
indeed
determine
is
that the
over the property
overhang
line, then yes.
Is over on the, across the property line, then it would come back to us, correct? Okay.
I guess I'm asking for a clarification, so I was taking this to be a deferral, have them research this and come back at the next BZA with that information, or is what you're proposing is that this be an approval, but then the approval isn't any good till they've proven this? Or I guess I just need a clarification on what you're actually thinking.
Yes, they need to approve, that they need to prove that this has been met.
Bring it back to this board or just to staff?
Well, if it's been met, then I think it's an administrative thing, but if it's
Then
not
your
been met,
motion is for approval subject to them providing this information to staff then? Is that?
Yes.
Mr. Daly, are you in agreement with that? Okay, any other discussion? All right. All in favor of the substitute motion, say aye.
Aye.
I'm gonna have to see a raise of hands. Okay, opposed, same sign. Okay, so substitute motion carries 8-2.
If you voted for it, can you put your hand up again?
What was this?
If you voted for
The
the
substitute.
substitute motion, can you put your hand up? Got it? Okay. With that,
Hold on, hold on. Well, could we ask Dale to inquire of how these get a building permit without any location specific
Open it up a
activity?
bag of
I
worms.
will inquire.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes.
thank you,
And
Dale.
report. I really want to know.
You open up a bag, you open up a can of worms, trust me.
We are adjourned.
Let's go fishing, man.